All right, we are live. Hello, Kyle.
Hello, Eric.
So nice of you to join me. I was asking around in the Hex and the Pulse Chain chats to find someone who would be a qualified person to properly address questions around Hex and Pulse Chain. And I think actually you contacted me, and then I asked in the chats whether or not this person is qualified, and people told me that you are a developer, that you have a intimate understanding of the inner mechanics of Hex and Pulse Chain, and that you would be the right person to talk to. So, could you just give me a super brief background as to what your involvement with Hex and Pulse Chain is, so that the listeners understand?
Sure. So my name's Kyle. I'm a software engineer professionally. I came across the Hex project in early 2019 through a content creator named Chris Coney. He had talked about it, and it seemed interesting enough to look into. I've been an active community member ever since. My key involvement in Hex started with writing a simulator, sort of random actor or random walk models for how users might use the contract. So I encoded the contract, took it from Solidity, ported it to C#, wrote some stochastic modeling software, and discovered that there was a bug in the business logic, that it just simply did not do what it said it would. Through a series of conversations and sharing kind of data with Richard, we became, I guess, kind of confidants on the project. And so I was brought into kind of the inner circle to discuss methods to fix the mechanism so that the mechanism would match what the marketing material said. And I was really involved in kind of every aspect of the project from there on in, design, implementation, testing, security audits. I think the only part that I didn't directly handle was anything around actually launching the website. And
Okay.
since then, I've just continued to be around, answer questions, and just try and be a resource for people.
Okay. And what about the Pulse Chain? Are you in any way involved in the development or thinking process around the Pulse Chain project that is now the talk of the town?
The talk of the town. Yes. So I'm still not employed by Richard, and I never have been. So my involvement's mostly been as a person who is trustworthy to talk honestly about design trade-offs and decisions, to experiment with different technologies or different tools, try and help facilitate coming up with solutions if people hit roadblocks. I look over a lot of code and sort of discuss sort of design ideas, trade-offs, and mechanisms.
Mm. Yeah, there's a reason that there were a couple of people that reached out that wanted to be the person that I would discuss this project with. And from my conversations with you, you've only been transparent and honest and rational in the discussions that we've had. So that's why I thought that you would be a good fit, so that we don't get into the whole cultist and tribalist parts of this discussion that can sort of be annoying when you're just trying to talk about the facts.
Yeah, that's a little too common a refrain that people just jump back to that.
Yeah.
So I guess from my end, I'm curious about who you are and what your background is. I don't really know you as an internet persona. I've just seen your name thrown around a lot, and when folks in one of the chat rooms said you were looking for a person to speak with on this topic, that's why I got in touch. 'Cause I'm always happy to be that guy.
Yeah. Well, I'm Eric Wall. I manage a cryptocurrency hedge fund out of Scandinavia, and I've been involved in the Bitcoin and Ethereum communities for pretty much since the beginning. So I've been in the industry for about 10 years, and I think the reason that there's a very strong interest for the Hex community for me to opine or address points around the Hex project is because when I was in Malta in 2019, I met Richard actually as I was entering the conference, and I didn't know much about Hex at the time. I don't think it had launched at the time, so there was very little information. And we knew each other from Twitter. I have a computer science background. I got a master's degree in computer science, and I've been involved in addressing a number of different projects, such as IOTA, and looking at the technology stacks, and um, kind of been a person to highlight things that are not well known about different cryptocurrency projects. And over time, as I kept doing this and I kept finding out more uncomfortable details around various cryptocurrency projects, I guess the community thinks of me as a cryptocurrency project critic. And that interview that I had then with Richard, and I knew Richard from before that. The first time I met him was in 2018, where he participated in a Swedish cryptocurrency conference called Bloxpo. So I met him. I knew him a little bit personally from seeing him at the conference there and going to the parties with him afterwards. So I would consider Richard to be, at that time at least, a friend of mine. And he's always been someone that I like to argue with, because he's very, when you debate Richard, he's a very good debater and a very challenging opponent to debate. And I do enjoy debating myself. So that's why I've kept in touch with Richard, to just for the intellectual challenge of trying to win the arguments. So that interview, I think that a lot of Hex community members watched that interview and thought that this was one of the few interviews where Richard was put on the spot, and that I was someone that I was asking the hard questions around the Hex project. And I did say that what he described was the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
I've seen that quote.
Yeah.
I have seen that quote. I think you actually upgraded it to bottom 10 by the end of the interview.
Yeah, I did say that after he explained more about it. I did say that it wasn't the dumbest thing that I've heard in my entire life, but it was, one of the dumber things that I've heard in my life, because I didn't really understand what the value proposition was of having the ability to stake your Hex tokens, and for that reason accumulate more Hex. In my mind, you were only diluting the supply of Hex, but you weren't necessarily creating anything out of value. And Richard said during that interview, well, if you are a staker, then you are receiving the inflation in the protocol. So you are not actually getting any dilution. It's the other people that are suffering the dilution. And you can actually grow your portion of the Hex supply by being a staker. So, but in my mind, you're still just making coins circulate between Hex users, and it's very hard to see. Okay, so what's the value this brings to society? That there are just a circulation of Hex coins moving from one group to the other. And more importantly, when you're thinking about this in the context of a cryptocurrency that's supposed to be used for transactions, that's supposed to become a currency, that's supposed to become a store of value, it feels like if you want to avoid dilution in the system, then you have to unstake your Hex. But if you are unstaked, then you are getting diluted by the people that are staking. So there's a very small incentive to be an unstaked Hex user using Hex as a currency, because there are stakers in the system that are just staking, but they're not actually securing the blockchain. They're not actually doing anything out of value that should allow them to dilute you. However, the response from the Hex community has been that, well, when the stakers stake their Hex, they're essentially locking up a portion of the supply, which means that the unlocked portion of the supply will appreciate in value, because So if you are unstaked, then it means that you can get a higher value for your hex. So that's the trade-off between the stakers and the non-stakers. The stakers, they earn the rewards, they grow their portion of the hex supply, but the unstaked people, they get a higher value that they can sell their hex for. So it's a trade-off, and depending on which type of user you are, if you're a long-term holder or if you're a person that wants current highest possible value for the hex that you have in your wallet, then each user has different benefits. And
so
yeah,
go
ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We've left your background maybe 3 minutes ago. I actually had one follow-up question based on what you described. You said that you have a master's in computer science, primarily from the technology aspect, but you started with your current role as working for a hedge fund for cryptocurrencies. So are you primarily in like a technical assessment role, or it sounds like you may have some finance background as well?
Well, from my academic background, I don't have any finance background. I just have a computer science background, and then I specialized in blockchain technology. I wrote my master thesis on blockchain technology. But alongside this, I was buying Bitcoin, trading Bitcoin since 2012, and I was using in the early years, I was using technical analysis to figure out how traders were trading it, and then as time went on and I learned to program better, I was able to empirically study the models and the indicators that people were using to trade using technical analysis. And I didn't find any empirical evidence that using technical analysis was profitable in the long term, at least not using those indicators that Bitcoin traders were predominantly using at the time.
Gotcha.
So I began investing in cryptocurrencies based on fundamentals. So I would look at projects that were innovating in some kind of sense. So I would be mostly on the technical due diligence side of things, trying to understand which projects have legs. But then, by virtue of being an investor in the space for nearly a decade, I would sort of come to learn more about how these communities evolve and how value is generated within these systems. As time went on, I took more and more of an investor role. I started working for a traditional finance company that built exchanges and clearinghouses, and understanding more about the financial products from that angle of actually building the matching engines and the clearinghouses, the technology for those, while at the same time investing and using the same trading tools myself. So I would become a sophisticated or advanced cryptocurrency trader from that role. And then after NASDAQ acquired the company that I was working for, I had been getting requests for years at that point for people that wanted to get the same exposure to the cryptocurrency industry as I had. So basically people that were requesting that I would open up my portfolio for other investments. And that took the form of a hedge fund eventually when I found the right partners to launch the hedge fund with. So I'm the chief investment officer. I select the projects, and I would say that these days my attention is sort of split between the technical side of cryptocurrency projects and the investment side, because now we do act as a VC in the industry. We look at investment cases, and there are so much more parameters. I mean, actually, technology is just one small parameter of, well, not a small one. It's a big one, but in the overall investment case of a project, there's so much more than just the technology that you need to understand, that you need to study. You need to understand the market psychology, how other people think when they invest, and how different projects compete with each other, and how narratives are formed. So all those things are things that I've been involved in doing for a long time. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to keep going farther afield, but we can focus in on the topics at hand. Like, you made me think of a couple of things.
Yeah. So, did you have anything in particular to address around? I mean, did you have any background in the cryptocurrency industry before you were pulled into the Hex project. I'm trying to understand what was your mental framework, or what were you comparing it to when you got
Sure.
interested in Hex?
So, in early 2017, I was very interested in U.S. elections. So there was a kind of a kerfuffle during the 2016 presidential election in the U.S., and there was a lot of confusion around maybe subtle changes in how elections were held. So I got really interested in the question, why can't we vote from our phones, or have essentially mobile voting? Um, and all the problems that I thought existed in electronic voting, it turns out all the real research is not around that at all. It's all around building cryptographically secure protocols for collusion or coercion resistant voting. So ways in
Right.
which you can securely tally votes, but a adversarial government can't have proof that you voted a certain way, or you can't offer to sell your vote because you can't prove that you voted a certain way, but the tally ends up correct in the end.
Yeah, yeah. I've been
In
yeah, sorry to interrupt. I've been thinking about the same problem for a long time, and I remember that a lot of people have been talking about how blockchains are supposed to be the solution to making voting more democratic in a digital form that's cryptographically secure. But it all comes down to, in my mind, it all comes down to how, if it's an election. I mean, of course, you can do voting for a DAO, for instance, where people vote with their coins and their signatures. But when it comes to like the governance of a country, how are you going to be sure that the person that's clicking the option that they're voting on isn't having a gun held to their head?
right.
That's very
Oh, no,
difficult to prove.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is a whole rabbit hole. I did a lot of sort of self-driven research in trying to learn about all of the sort of modern approaches, because I mean, this problem's been examined for some time. But I want to tie it, without getting too deep into that.
Yeah.
I want to tie it back to how I got into sort of blockchain tech. So in, I don't know, maybe April or June, I think concurrently with me learning more and more about these different protocols, my brother had heard about this exploding new asset called Bitcoin. I had heard about Bitcoin, knew kind of vaguely what it was about, but didn't really think of it in terms of monetary value, more like a sort of a cypherpunk toy.
Hmm.
He said, "Hey, I heard about this thing. Have you heard about this? It's like $600 a coin or something. I don't remember the exact number." And I said, "I don't know. I don't have time to look into this." And fast forward to the end of that year, and he was very mad at me for not having given the time for him to ride that price up. However, it did plant the seed that there is a common component in a lot of these voting schemes as a append-only database that they just call generally a bulletin board. Some permissionless, publicly viewable data store that can only go forward in time. And that's when I did get kind of interested in the idea of blockchains and Bitcoin. And I read the white paper and I thought, oh yeah, this totally fits the bill. I could probably just rip out the coin part of it and just do the append-only database and get a little proof of concept going. And I don't know how I came across it, but I found that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of other cryptocurrency projects that had more features, essentially, or they had a slightly different take on how to use a verifiable append-only style database. And I was a little bit naive. So the ICO craze, I didn't fall for any, but I thought, oh, this is it. This is like the new way that people do fundraising. I hadn't really considered the scam angle.
Hmm.
But I was interested in this kind of explosion of ideas. I think you mentioned having some exposure to a cryptocurrency-based portfolio, and I think there were several projects trying to do that, either through a DAO. The name IDEX comes to mind, but I don't know if that's actually an example of one. And it was just all of these ideas for how to use essentially permissionless public databases. where you don't need coordination between companies. Most of my professional life has been with large corporations that have explicit contracts and deals around data sharing or protocols to send tightly secured data. But trying to think about problems in the world in the other way, sort of from the inside out, where the data is all verifiable, how can you interact with such a thing and still get meaningful work done? We went through that cycle in 2017, 2018. Almost all the interesting projects either turned out to be scams or they didn't work. The implementation didn't work, but they had flashy marketing material. And I became very disillusioned. And I think maybe the last straw was the EOS launch. So a colleague at work had told me about this cool project. It was going to build a whole ecosystem. It was going to be higher throughput. And it had all these cool ideas from a guy who'd already delivered several blockchain projects. So it was definitely going to be executed on, one Dan Larimer, who's kind of running the show. And I think when that completely fizzled and then just degenerated into, a cartel, essentially, doing all the block validation, I was kind of done. I said, okay, that was interesting, but that was a phase. So I think I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before. This is not as interesting in practice as I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
So fast forward 2019, I hear about this Hex project, and I thought, well, okay, so Ethereum seems to be serious. That seems to be a real thing. And I wanted to teach myself blockchain programming smart contracts. And I thought, well, this is a relatively simple concept. I'll just start with this, see if I can reproduce it, and go from there.
Okay. Yeah. When I was introduced to you, I did ask a few other people in the Hex community what their thoughts were around you as a person and whether or not you would be qualified to have this conversation so that the listeners of the Hex community wouldn't feel that, I was discussing an underqualified opponent in some way. And if you remember when someone mentioned to me that you may have a too technical slant to your expertise, so that if we get into questions that surround the philosophy, ethics, or economics, or other aspects of Hex that are less technical, perhaps those questions wouldn't really land well, and people would perhaps feel that, it would be much better if Richard were here to address those points. So if you remember, before we started to have this conversation, I did ask a few questions to you just to make sure that you were able to articulate the Hex value proposition in a good way. And one question that I asked you was, let's say if I, for instance, say that Hex is dumb because you have to lock up capital not to get diluted, and if you want to transfer Hex around like a normal currency, you have no choice but to get diluted. So you probably not want to use it as a currency, and asked you what your counter argument to that would be, just to sort of feel you out. Do you remember when I asked you that question? I do. So how would you address that argument today if I ask you the same question again?
So what I would say, first, I'll clarify that at the time, I wasn't sure which part of that question you were trying to set up.
Yeah, that's why I'm readdressing it. Yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up again, so that we can.
Sure.
Now that you know why I'm interested in it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So let's see, how do I want to answer this? So the core proposition for Hex kind of boils down to if you are leaving your money at rest, meaning you don't plan to use it for anything, you're getting diluted. In many ways, this kind of mirrors savings accounts in the real world, or checking accounts, I suppose. That all of your money is spendable. You've made no commitments about what you're going to do with it, but you're being diluted. I think Hex attempts to model that in much more extreme terms. I mean, I think people have quoted very high interest rates, which is see. I assume you understand the basic mechanism that the currency inflates, but only the percentage of coins that are staking receive that inflation. So interest rates can be much higher than nominal inflation.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So this question comes up a lot, or some version of it. How long should I stake? And I think the best answer that the community at large has agreed on is you should treat it a lot like cash, that you should have a plan for long-term investments that have maybe not in the hex sense, not stable, but higher yields, but that you have a committed period where you're not going to need those funds.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep a relatively small amount of your hex liquid to take advantage of price fluctuations, or if you have a big expense coming up, people have paid off student loans, they've paid off cars, they've used kind of current price action on a small percentage of their stack to do some work in their real financial life. Whereas the rest, they've made varying length commitments not to sell in exchange for not being diluted for that part.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit on this, because I do think it's an interesting question. So would you say that the unstaked portion of hex, that it benefits, like if you are just a person that's trying to use hex as a currency, are you in any way benefiting from the fact that there's a large portion of the other hex holders that are locking up their hex and diluting you because you are not staking, they are staking, so they are getting the rewards? So would you say that, is there an economic benefit for these people, that there are other people staking their hex? I mean, in Ethereum, or at least in Ethereum 2.0, the reason why you are okay with people staking and earning rewards is because they inherently secure the blockchain itself. But in the hex system, the hex stakers, they're just staking. So what would you say, like, if I want to use hex as a currency and there's other people staking, what is my benefit to participating in the same system as them? What do I get from the fact that they are staking while I'm just trying to use hex as a currency?
That's a great question, and this is definitely on the edge, if not entirely out of the technical realm. So the pitch for hex, which I think everyone has heard, including yourself, is that the point of locking up coins and the reason they're rewarded is because it takes supply off market. And if supply is lower, demand remains constant or goes up, then price goes up.
Yeah. Just interject there.
That's the pitch.
Yeah, sure. I know that, but just interject there. You just talked about a couple of minutes ago. You just talked about if you own hex, like which portion of your hex should you stake? And you said, well, you should think about it as your cash. If you have cash that you're not planning to use for a long time, you can take that cash and you can put it into a savings account. But if that's the scenario that we're thinking about, that these are people that own hex and they already plan not to touch a portion of their hex, what does it exactly matter that they are now locking that hex up? I mean, if they weren't intending on using it in the first place, then it wasn't a part of the liquid supply. It was something that was supposed to sit on their balance sheet in their accounts just to be there, because they're not planning to use that. So if that's already the case, how are you as a person that is using hex as a currency actually benefiting? Because you haven't taken supply that was going to be used off the market. You've only taken supply off the market that wasn't going to be intended to be used in the economy anyway. Do you get my point?
I do, and I guess I want to continue where I left off. I was just sort of setting the premise that this is that was the premise. That wasn't my full answer, just for context. So as to how that plays out in real life, it's basically a question of marketing, of people who have not heard of it and want to buy it. That's where the demand comes from. And if I just want to have some liquid hex, either to pay for goods and services, which I think there has been some sort of tiny amount of economic activity there of using it directly, though it may just be a gimmick. I actually don't know much about it, but I know for sure someone did the 2 pizzas for some amount of hex thing, vis-a-vis the Bitcoin one. The primary use is to take advantage of volatility or of cycles in crypto to basically sell a local top, or sell when you think you need to convert back to fiat to do some economic thing in your regular life, whether it's paying a debt, or I think lately people have been buying flashy stuff or donating to charity or something. So I don't even know what the right word is. It's not really a goal per se. You asked what a person who just sits in liquid hex would use it for. Essentially, for some activity to either onboard new users, so they'd convert it back to fiat and do marketing campaigns, which we've seen. People buy advertisements or buy billboard space to try and onboard new users, to raise the demand or the USD value of their other liquid hex, so they can either do more marketing campaigns or, again, pay debts or something.
Okay, so just to clarify here, would you say that the overall Hex community person's understanding of what the purpose of Hex is it to be used as a currency? Like, is it competing directly with Bitcoin or Ethereum or stable coins as an instrument for transacting value, buying things, using it as a currency? Is that one of the value pitches?
No, I think its primary use case is store of value. That was always kind of the narrative, is that it was meant to be a better store of value, and that you could keep yourself from being diluted by committing to not participating in the volatility game.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
but the people in practice have shaved off a bit of their value store to use it as a currency. I'm sorry, not as a currency, to convert it to fiat, to use that as a currency. I don't think people have the illusion that they're going to be paying their rent in Hex.
So what would you say? So if it's supposed to be a store value, what would you say is the advantage of Hex versus Ethereum or Ether tokens? Because if it's supposed to be a store value, you want there to be some inherent demand, or somebody that there needs to be a reason to prefer Hex over Ether. And Ether has the benefit of being required to execute transactions and launch smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain, whereas Hex doesn't have that. It doesn't have the same demand profile as Hex.
That's true.
But, and you can also, in Ethereum, you can also say that, okay, if you have a portion of the supply that you're not planning to use, you can also lock up that portion of your Ether and stake, and you can get returns that way.
Well, when that's really live, yeah, you can do that.
Well, it is live now on the Beacon chain. So there's a Beacon chain right now, and you don't even have to. There's staking derivatives that you can buy. So if you have, let's say, 1 Ether today, you can send it to a staking derivative contract, such as the Lido DAO, and then you're now getting a return on your Ether instead of using it as a currency. So I'm just trying to understand, so Ether, it's the main currency, it's a native currency of the Ethereum platform. You have the opportunity to use it as a currency. You have the opportunity to stake it, use it in DeFi to get yield, to yield farm, to lend it out. So Hex has this thing that where you can stake it, and based on how long you stake and how much you stake, you get a part of the inflation in the system. But why would this be more attractive than just using Ether instead?
So I guess I have 2 responses. So first, I'm saying a little bit tongue in cheek about ETH 2.0 not quite being available. I I guess I developed a little bit of cynicism after 2017, so that until features are truly shipped to production, even derivative contracts are not mainnet ETH 2.0 yet. I have full faith that the technical team is going to get that launched. So I say somewhat tongue-in-cheek, similar to Cardano, smart contracts have been coming for 3 years. I'm sure it will happen. So I don't mean to belittle that at all. With regard to the value proposition, I think ETH, to me, the issue has been, and we have a couple of practical examples of this, that it wants to be a store of value. That's a relatively new narrative. I remember pretty vividly that there was some almost consternation from Vitalik and a couple of the other technical leads on the project of why people value it so highly, because it's basically compute credits. If you could tokenize AWS or Google Cloud credits, that's what ETH is. It's the token of the network substrate. You earn it by mining it, and then it's essentially fungible compute credits that you can use either for store operations or to do compute. And when the price of the credits go up, then the price to do compute goes up. And we've seen this. I mean, even in the time between when Hex launched and maybe 6 months later, the price had gone up at least 100x. It just in the GWEI cost, meaning 1 GWEI per gas was sufficient at the beginning of 2020. By June, it was on average 100 to 120 GWEI per gas. And the price in US dollars of those GWEI had gone up. So it's unstable as an application platform. So I feel a little uncomfortable with letting ETH be all the things in the system, meaning it's the currency that drives compute, it is the native token, and it's a store of value. Because those things interact in ways that are very unpleasant to try and develop against. I personally know several developers who wrote smart contracts that then became essentially unusable because the cost to do an operation was way more expensive than the utility of that operation. The other cryptocurrency that's sort of, the king, Bitcoin, is a little bit closer to what Hex is attempting to do, meaning that the only thing you can really do with it is have it and try and maintain your relative position in the sort of rank of holders, and you can transfer it. So there's some utility you get out of being on the ETH network that you don't get from Bitcoin, but I think that's the closer analog.
Yeah,
Whereas ETH, I think, is a different beast.
I think the response that I was fishing for here, and I think the response that Richard would have given if he was asked the question like, okay, why would you prefer Hex when you have ETH and ETH has natural demand? I think that the answer that Richard would give there he would say that, well, Ether users, they need to pay inflation to miners to secure the blockchain. So there's block rewards. There's 2 Ether in every block that goes to the miners. In Hex, you're already piggybacking on the security of that platform. So all the rewards in the system can go directly to Hex holders. So people that are staking Hex. So you don't have to pay a security budget that inflates the supply of the protocol to the people that are securing the protocol, because you're not actually involved in securing the protocol. So all the demand or all the value accrual can go directly to just the people that are just holding Hex. So I think that's...
Let's see, you don't need to talk to him. You know what he would say.
Well, I do talk to him from time to time. Like I said, we do enjoy battling with each other, like discussing with each other. So it happens that we speak on the phone, perhaps once every quarter or so, just to rehash the arguments and see where we are, and
Yeah.
it's always fun. Maybe I should address like what's the reason that we're having this discussion, and why don't I have this conversation with Richard directly? I think that a lot of Hex users that's perhaps a question that's on the top of their head, and I can address that, and I've received a lot of criticism from the Hex community because of my answer, and the reason is that there doesn't seem to be, like, if you look at the Bitcoin community and the Ethereum community or the overall cryptocurrency community, the conception of Hex in the industry overall is that Hex is a scam, that it is a project that's marketed by Richard in order to enrich himself. And it's because you can take these APY, like the interest rate that you can earn in the system, and show like, okay, so if you're a Hex staker, this is how much you earn in percentage each year. That's very attractive to novice users. And just by giving Hex airtime, you bring in such people that don't understand the cryptocurrency ecosystem well enough to guard themselves from investing it without understanding it. So if I was supposed to have if I had a conversation with Richard and I published it on my Twitter page, that would bring a lot of attention to the Hex project. And because it is a sophisticated marketing tool that pulls people in, then if you already know, like if you are an Ethereum person or a Bitcoin person, and you already have if you already think that this project is harmful, it doesn't contribute, it doesn't innovate, it's just pulling people in and then getting them into this weird casino game where you're staking your Hex and trying to figure out when to sell it before everybody else does. If that's your viewpoint, then bringing any more focus to the Hex project is only detrimental. And so if I discussed with Richard and the clip got traction, then people would say that I'm helping Richard market his project through my audience base. So I would receive a lot of criticism for that. And honestly, personally, I don't have anything to gain by, I don't have anything to earn by getting into the crossfire of these communities. So if there are things that people want me to address and discuss around the Hex project, I can do it in a more low profile way. So if they want to hear my views on the project, I can do it this way. Everyone can get access to this conversation if they want to, but I won't have to deal with all the people that would criticize and harass me for giving Richard a platform to market his project. And it is also, I think it is also understood and quite well known that when the Hex project was launching, it was an intentional strategy by Richard to market his project by debating prominent Bitcoiners, because he is a good debater. So he has the ability to make someone like Stefan de Vera look very stupid just by not being as good of a debater as he is. And that makes people think, okay, so Richard is the intellectually superior opponent in this discussion. So why would I prefer the currency that Stefan de Vera uses and not just go with Richard's currency instead? So because Richard is charismatic and a good debater, no matter like what is the thing that he's actually advocating for, he's going to be able to pull people into that project. And that's why you as an influencer, you have an ethical responsibility to not make that happen, not give Richard that platform. And I understand people that have that viewpoint. If I were to debate Richard, it would be for selfish reasons, because I enjoy the intellectual challenge of debating him. But I don't think it would be construed as me doing something positive for the industry overall. So that's why I've opted for a compromise here, so that I can debate you, everyone can get access to this conversation, but I don't have to deal with all the baggage and the I don't have any incentive to cause a controversy within the Bitcoin and the Ethereum communities, because this is not that warm to my heart enough for me to make that sacrifice. And I think that people should just respect that. That's it's a personal decision for me. Like, what do I want to spend my time and energy defending? And as you can hear in this conversation, I do have some skepticism towards the Hex project. Maybe to call it the dumbest thing that I've ever heard my entire life was, I mean, obviously there are people that are earning.
That's banter, man.
It's banter, and there are people that have made tremendous gains investing in Hex. So for them, it's not stupid, right? It's for them, it's immensely valuable and life transformational. So I can understand that people feel that comment, that it's the dumbest thing that someone's ever heard about, is feels unfair. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like, when I'm looking at the cryptocurrency space, I look for different types of innovations, somebody that's bringing something new to the table. These are the things that I want to highlight. And I don't think that Hex, the staking mechanism in Hex, qualifies as a valuable enough innovation to die on the hill of having the conversation in public.
Which makes sense. So you've made 5 points. I'm going to respond to all of them. You started with the point that you think Richard would make is about network security is a cost that Hex doesn't have to bear. You asked specifically about contrasting ETH with Hex. So I was responding more to ETH as compute tokens and as a network token. So I'm acutely aware of the, unfortunately, kind of mixed purpose of having network tokens be valuable. Because they are the reward for securing the network, and they are the unit of transfer. And in the case of some networks, they are used or burned or consumed in some way to do action on the network. That's kind of where I was going with Bitcoin is probably the more apt comparison because Bitcoins don't get used to run computations. They really are only to secure the network. You're rewarded them for securing the network, and they're the unit of account for the network. Hex only needs the latter part, and so it can change the mechanism by which they're rewarded. The second point you made that I want to respond to was about giving airtime to either harmful or complex projects. One of my favorite analogies also comes with from a computer science point of view, is that there are some tools that are very sharp, like threads. If anyone tries to write code that directly manipulates threads, that is a very sharp tool. There are great purposes for it, but if someone doesn't understand it, you can get into a lot of trouble. Similar with financial products. So my point of frustration with kind of the industry at large has been nearly unlimited airtime for anything that slaps the name DeFi on itself. We had a whole rash of completely failed projects in the last year that had bugs, that had maybe exploits, or maybe just nefarious sort of underhanded use by founders. Even the BZX protocol was exploited in several different ways. And these do real harm to people. But the industry at large, and obviously if I don't know much about your background, I don't know if you were involved in this, but at least the people in the ETH and Bitcoin communities seem to have endless oxygen to give to certain kinds of projects that may or may not do what they say they will do, and that may fail catastrophically, and that may be at least as complex an instrument as Hex, but encouraging people that they need exposure to DeFi, even though DeFi is a nebulous term and can be enormously complex. I mean, even
I just want to jump in. I just want to jump in super quick there, and sure. actually, I do agree with you. Like there are things with DeFi that are valuable. For instance, you can get if you have Ether, you can get loan in USDC, and you can use that to pay your bills, and then at the end of the month you get your salary and you can pay the loan back, and then you haven't sold any ether. Like that's can be useful for any person that has an investment
Yes.
in a cryptocurrency. But then in the DeFi summer, you had all these food tokens like Yam and
Oh yeah.
and they didn't provide any utility except it was like a complex casino game where that everyone was playing, and they were playing it for fun. And I was one of the persons that would say, well, if you are just making financial products that are just redistributing capital from one person to the other, but you're not actually providing any utility that's valuable, how is Yam different from Hex, and how is Yam less of a scam than Hex is? And I suppose what the Ether community is, that they would point to Richard and say, okay, well, look at how rich the origin address in Hex is getting, and so they would say that because Richard is much more successful in enriching himself, that makes it more of a scam, because the origin address has undue it has an undue advantageous position in the Hex system, where perhaps Yam didn't.
I have heard that criticism. I guess I'll finish the thought.
Yeah, I'll let you go back.
With the Ampleforth project. So this was another supposed sort of pillar of DeFi, or that's how it held itself up. And their crowd sale, if memory serves, only distributed something like 15% of the total tokens that they'd already pre-allocated through pre-mine and early investment rounds, something like 80 or 90% of the tokens. But they don't make a point of that. It's in a pie chart somewhere kind of deep in their website. And my sense is that not all projects, but many projects did have I don't want to say unfair, because that's a value judgment. They were not forthcoming about what the actual distribution of tokens was going to be like, or what the state of things were going to be for holders at the end of a launch phase. Faye was kind of a more recent kind of catastrophic failure that acted in the same way. So I take your point that there was a lot of commentary on what the deal was with how the early or the launch phase of Hex went, and then this origin address that was programmed into the contract. But it's hard as a person who was there the whole time not to notice a little bit of hypocrisy, that similar mechanisms, if they aren't highlighted or if they aren't broadcast, just go unspoken about, and there's sort of less scrutiny on some of those projects.
Yeah, I understand that completely, and I think that the reason that Ampleforth was able to get airtime while being equally as redundant or circular as Hex is that the Ethereum community, or people in the Ethereum community, believed that Ample was a stablecoin, because you have this elastic supply. But if you buy Ample tokens, then the value of the tokens that you buy, just because the supply and your number of coins grow and shrink depending on what the price does, I mean, you are still exposed to the market cap of Ample, so it's not a stable coin. I mean, the value, if it, I mean, so I think that the reason that Ample got as much attention as it did was because there were people that were confused about. There were people that actually thought that Ample was a stable coin, because they didn't understand that when you buy Ample, yes, the Ample exchange rate can be stable, but because the number of tokens that you have in your wallet shrinks and grows depending on the demand for the currency, they didn't understand that it's not a stable coin just because the price is stable. It's the
Yes,
value that you have invested that needs to
yes,
be stable, and I think that's the
exactly.
reason. So they were able to trick. I think Ampleforth were able to trick the Ethereum community that they had built a stable coin, and that's why they were given airtime. If more people
I
understood that it wasn't a stable coin, they wouldn't have gotten the airtime.
so I agree, but I guess my point that follows is the community at large, it was very quick to identify Richard as a very polarizing figure, and the project sounds fishy, and there seems to be all these angles that make it seem scammy. And so probably my first contribution, like artifact, that was a contribution to the project, was writing out in English what the code of the contract would do, and backing that up with evidence from stochastic modeling, like I talked about what comes out the other side. If you do this, then that will happen. Here are the functions. Here's what they do. I mentioned that there's this origin address, and here's how that works. We were very open and forthright about all of the mechanisms built into the contract. As you just described, Ample was a little bit more subtle. I would almost say dishonest about what their coin did. Yes, it targeted an exchange value of $1 per token. How did it achieve that? Oh, through the monetary policy. What's the monetary policy? Oh, that's just the contract that erases coins from your balance. I mean, that's dishonest. That's just straight dishonest. And the thing that I find frustrating, and that I think a lot of the community find frustrating, is that the ETH community at large has been tricked and has made mistakes, both honest mistakes, and also it seems like there may be some collusion or some private deals with exchanges to get these things listed the day that they hit the market. There's sort of secondary evidence for that. The fact that Ampleforth, for example, was on page 1 of CoinMarketCap on launch day. So despite some combination of making mistakes and being duped, no one ever revisits their opinion on Hex or their opinion on Richard, or even admits, oh, I was tricked. Oh, I've made this mistake, and I still don't like Hex, but you guys were pretty forthright about what was going on, and I was just duped. And I'm not saying that people need to go back through their entire history of every mistake they've ever made and offer a mea culpa, but when pressed, hey, you all just made your 6th mistake about a supposed DeFi product that crashed and burned, on launch. Can we get a second opinion? Nope, you're a scam. Go away. It feels like a very prejudiced or prejudicial attitude.
Yeah, I can explain why that is, perhaps. And before we leave Ampleforth and Ample, perhaps why you don't see mea culpas on that is that, I just described to you, or I just explained that we're on the same page in considering how dumb the Ampleforth project is. The one thing that I would say, though, that let's say that you have a salary in Ample, that there's a smart contract that is sending Ample tokens to you on a regular basis. So you know that programmatically you are, or let's say that programmatically that you are supposed to get 1,000 Ample tokens every month. Because the price of each Ample token is fixed, then you know that, okay, I will receive a fixed amount in dollar terms when this payment is made. So even though that after you receive the payment, then you are exposed to the market cap or the demand for Ample, but at the time of the payment, then, and if you know how many tokens you're going to get paid, then you do have this stable coin aspect to it, that okay, if you know how many tokens you're going to get paid, then you know that how much your salary will be worth. Then of course you can take this into you can dig deeper into this argument and say, okay, so but how can you even say that, how can a smart contract, for instance, lock up a portion of ample supply and say it's going to pay out 1,000 ample each month if the ample supply grows and shrinks? Maybe the smart contract won't even have ample tokens to pay out the salary because the supply has been erased, so it doesn't exist anymore. So maybe that doesn't even work. But I think that that's one of the reasons why people still think that there was some utility to the Ample project. But when it comes to Hex and when it comes to Richard as a person, I think that the main reason that nobody's ever going to forgive Richard is probably because they see it as they can see what he did from his moment of entering the industry. He was a Bitcoin proponent, a Bitcoin maximalist, and he became very, very good at articulating the arguments for Bitcoin, in favor of Bitcoin. So Bitcoiners gave him a stage, and they gave him I wouldn't say they gave him a stage, but he earned a stage for himself by being a proponent of Bitcoin. And then when the time came, he used all those followers that he had, all the platform that he had acquired for himself to market his own non-Bitcoin projects. And if you do that in the Bitcoin community, you are. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're Richard Hart or if you're Robert Breedlove or if you're Trace Mayer. Anybody that has tried to do this in the past by using your Bitcoin influence to shill a non-Bitcoin currency, you are forever labeled as a scammer. It's different in the Ethereum ecosystem. I do agree with that, but I think that Ethereum people also can see that what's the play with Richard, like how does he function as an individual. And I think that he has been just generally understood as someone that uses his debating skills to get an audience and then to shill products to that audience that he has built for himself. So I think that Richard, if you compare to Ampleforth and those other projects, I think that Richard has tarnished his reputation too harshly, too badly, too poorly with the Ethereum community to ever get anyone to say, okay, maybe I was wrong about this part about Hex, or maybe I was wrong about that portion of Hex. It has to do with that Richard is such a high-profile character, and that he has earned so much money by doing this, that he's considered a trickster by the community, and it's going to be very, very hard for him to come back from that, I think.
I suppose so. I mean, I realize it's a double-edged sword, being a big personality in that way. I mean, this is overstating it, but there was some confusion or consternation a few years ago here in the U.S. about how the misbehavior of the military junta in Myanmar sort of escaped scrutiny when it became very fashionable to scrutinize dictators around the world. It's because they had faces and because they had behaviors and quirks and names, whereas the sort of nameless, faceless military tribunal doing equally horrible things, you couldn't name the people that were doing wrong, versus a Duterte or something. So I do understand that being a big personality is a double-edged sword. All I'm describing is that from the community's point of view, there is this point of frustration that people don't look past Richard to the people whose lives have been benefited. I think you alluded to it as well, that some people have been able to convert their Hex into fiat and make substantial changes in their lives. And that was something I didn't anticipate being part of in the community. But we do have, on the regular, people having made really touching changes in their lives. The ability to get out from under crushing debt, the ability to pay off a car or buy a car for an ailing parent, or I think one guy donated to a local charity that helps at-risk youth. I mean, people are not just doing good in their own lives, but real long-term good. I mean, things that remove friction or remove drag from their community to be better and to lift themselves up and lift others up. And almost uniformly, they talk about the the tenets of Hex about delaying gratification and the things that Richard talks about um, around the currency that are sort of marketing bullet points, but that when people take them seriously and apply them to their lives and their community, they're making really positive changes for themselves. And I think that's one of the reasons that the community really resents the treatment of Richard and the project as merely a scam. Oh, it's just this one guy who's enriched himself and he's a jerk and I don't like him. Whereas the stories of dozens or hundreds or thousands of people internationally who've lifted themselves up and feel good about that, feel like they're being completely dismissed or somehow in on it or mistreated essentially, and not people aren't hearing them out for the thing that's made such an impact for them.
Yeah, so there's two things here that I think we need to touch on, and the first one is that okay, so there's a bunch of people that made a lot of money investing and then selling their hex. So
Sure.
shouldn't we appreciate that these people benefited from hex? Like, isn't hex a good thing? I think all cryptocurrencies that go up in value, you can say the same thing about them, that these people made money, but in my mind, it all comes down to sustainability. Like how, in order for something not just to be a musical chairs game, there needs to be a sustainability for the project in the long term, and that only comes from a real value proposition. So in Hex, yes, the value has gone up, but you also and you have people that have made tons of money, but you also have tons of people that have where did that money come from? That money came from other people that invested in Hex, and that's not weird. It's the same thing with Bitcoin. It's the same thing with Ethereum. So I'm not criticizing that aspect. I'm just saying that while there are people that have made fortunes investing in Hex, those fortunes now they came from people that bought Hex, and then some of them are now staked for 15 years. So there's so on the other side of all these people that made investments, that made profits of Hex, there's also a huge portion of investors that sit with their Hex staked for the long term, and we don't know when those people sell, are they also going to make a profit or are they going to make a loss? And that's what it comes down to. So if it's just some people making money off Hex, and then the other people that invested after them, they lose money when investing in Hex, it's not really something that you can say this is good for society. It's a lottery where some of the people won because they bought and sold at the right time, and some of the people lost. So the only way to get out of that situation is that you are building a project that is just growing in value in perpetuity, like Bitcoiners believe. That they believe that this is going to become a store of value for eternity, for the future. So it's not a scam, because you're always going to be able to sell your Bitcoin for more. Everyone is always going to benefit from this. So we're going to come back to that point. Let's put a pin in that argument, and we're going to come back to it, because I think this ties into Pulse Chain and the sustainability of the project in the future. The second thing is that you said that there's a lot of frustration within the Hex community, because there are people that have made it a part of their ethos to contribute to society, to donate to charities and do good things with the profits that they've made. If I were supposed to take the devil's advocate position here, then I would say that all those things, like donating to the Sense Foundation, getting people excited about doing virtuous, good acts, you could say that that's a very sophisticated tactic employed by Richard in order to get people. If you're going to build a cult, like you need to get people inspired and aligned towards some type of mission and withhold some type of ethical values. And I think that like longevity it's something that I like contributing to longevity research, which is what you do if you donate to the Sense Foundation. That's something that I personally like. I resonate with that. So if you if you associate your project with making donations to that type of cause, then you're going to be much more successful at building a sustainable cult and community around your project. But the question is it genuine though? Like, is all that goodwill, is it genuine, or is it a marketing tactic to bring people into to make people more enthusiastic about the Hex project, to make them more enthusiastic about pulling more people in? And what does the net what does the net look like for Richard in this particular instance? Like, so let's say I think during the Pulse Chain sale, I think it was something like $30 million that was donated to the Sense Foundation. So people say, "Oh, look at Richard. I mean, he's so gracious that all these Pulse tokens are now going to go to people that didn't give money to Richard directly. They're instead going to go to people that donated to charities. Doesn't this mean that Richard is a person that should be highlighted and should be promoted?" But I think that because I think it was a clever thing to do because this brought a lot of attention from media sites and from the cryptocurrency community overall. I think even Vitalik commented on the Sense donation, the Sense Foundation donation. So I think that okay, so instead of Richard receiving $300 million in the Pulse Chain sale and donating zero to the Sense Foundation, now he's able to raise perhaps $500 million, and then there's a $30 million donation. So the net benefit for Richard is still a positive thing for Richard. Like if you think about his own self-interest, so it's just you could argue that trying to be virtuous in this way, yes, it does benefit society, but are the people that are engaged in that virtuous activity, do they actually care about? I know that Richard does care about longevity, so I'm not saying that he doesn't do that. I'm saying that if you make it ethically okay to get attention to your project by donating to charities, that's kind of a sly way to be able to enrich yourself while still seeming virtuous to the rest of the community. So I don't think that we should uplift this behavior because any project could do this. Any type of scam or pointless project could get a lot of attention if we gave them attention every time that they donated a portion of the funds that they raised to the Sense Foundation. If we talked about them in a good light, then the only thing I think the net result would be that more money would go to those projects, and if they do end up being scams, then there would be more money lost to scam projects than perhaps is donated to these charities. Like personally, I don't think that I care so much, because I think that if you are a person that's investing in Hex or in Pulse Chain, you're a speculator. You're gambling with your money, and if it wasn't Pulse Chain or if it wasn't Hex, it would be something else that you would be speculating in. So I think that it is a good thing that money is going to the Sense Foundation, but I'm not gonna promote or highlight or talk using my Twitter account about, oh, look what good these projects are doing to society, because I understand how that mechanic can be exploited very easily, and it allows projects a very easy way to whitewash their own reputation and get more airtime and get more attention and get more money, using that as sort of an excuse. Do you understand that point?
I do, and that's it's a fairly common or well-known tactic. I think in the aftermath of the large oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, that oil company BP did a bunch of charity work to try and highlight their own goodness, sort of in the aftermath of doing something terrible. So I know that tactic is used in the regular world as well. You touched on two things that I think maybe this can be the close of Hex, and we can move on to Pulse, just because it sort of ties up the loose end. So you'd mentioned that there's, if you want to build a cult, then you have to start with a set of shared values and make people feel like they're doing good, or that what they're doing is ethically correct. And then you get everybody on the same page, and then you can, have them build Jonestown, or whatever the crypto equivalent of that is. To me, the important thing is that we worry about that when we get there. I understand trying to have some foresight and see, try not to take for granted that the person leading always has everyone's best interest in mind. I get that. I'm not coming at this from a naive point of view. But there's definitely, in my opinion, a utilitarian argument to be made that if good is done, then the true motivation, I think you used the word true motivation, isn't as important until it's turned to bad purposes. So if people donated a bunch of money to Sens that they wouldn't have otherwise, but for a tax write-off and getting some free tokens, the good that the Sens Foundation is going to do is still quite real. And you can take that event and, like you said, maybe not lionize that behavior, because it could encourage the next person to be not so good about it, or that it draws attention to something that could ultimately do harm. But
yeah,
I would say don't entirely discount good acts, even if
no, I don't,
and pure motivation. That's fine. Hang on, there's one last thing that I'm going to tie this back to Hex. The thing that was important to me when I looked into the project was specifically that the code would do what the marketing material said it would do. That it could never create an obligation, like the Ampleforth example you gave. It could never create an obligation that it couldn't fulfill. That it was programmatically incapable of cheating anybody. And that even if the rules didn't make sense, or if you didn't like them, like the origin address, then you could just comment on those things. These are mechanisms that I do not like. I do not agree with the hypothesis of the project, but that it could never be said that the project won't do what it says it will do. So there's a kind of honesty that you have to reckon with what it says it will do versus how you feel about that, or if you think that's a useful innovation, or if you think there's too much centralized ownership risk, or if you think, this or that. And to me in the community, it's been continually surprising that people are not quite engaging at that level, and that they immediately jump to, yeah, but how much does Richard make? Yeah, but it's a scam because it's centralized, rather than, I don't agree that that's innovative. I don't agree that this is a useful value proposition. I don't think that's a good project. I will not spend money on it. It becomes deeper than that and somewhat personal, like right away.
No, I do agree with you, because if I would take one thing that interests me more than computer science, I would say that the subject that has been closest to my heart during my upbringing and my education has always been philosophy. And if I take in what you say, I mean, I am on the same page as you are, that you shouldn't just discredit good outcomes. Like, no matter what the motivations are behind someone doing a thing, if the net benefit to society is positive, then I would still, like, if I just channel my inner philosopher here, I would actually be on the same page as you. But the only reason that I would give it a pass here is that the capital that is being used here, this is, like, in my mind, degen, like degenerative speculating capital, and I don't really care. So let's say that I'm right, and by donating to the Sens Foundation in the Pulse chain sale, Richard did end up making more money for himself and more money for the Sense Foundation. Now, if that money, let's say he raised $100 million, that all went to zero for those investors, and there were $30 million that was donated to the Sense Foundation. Now, it's important to think about, okay, that $100 million that went to Richard, where would it have gone otherwise? And I think that if you're investing in this kind of project, then you're probably just trying to, I don't think that it would have done that much good to society, and it's
save children or give money to Richard.
I mean, I don't think that Richard is worse than the people that are investing in Hex and in Pulse Chain. So if he receives the money and he has the money instead of them having the money, the likelihood of that capital making good contributions to society is probably equal to those degenerative degen speculators. So for that reason, I'm inclined to agree with you and say that it is a net positive outcome that the Sense Foundation got money through this. But I'm not gonna allow people send me, they send me direct messages and they say, Eric, look at this, look at how much they donated to the Sense Foundation. You should talk about this publicly on your channels. That I'm not gonna do. So while I can say that yes, this was a good thing, I'm not gonna allow it to become a lever that people can use when marketing their projects. And I think that people have to respect that.
I totally respect that. I don't know who you're getting hate from on that point, but I mean it's your channel.
Yeah.
If you're worried about exposing that as a lever to be pulled, that makes total sense.
Yeah, I'm just responding to I get comments, messages from hundreds of people. We have there's a pretty large Norwegian and Swedish Hex community that communicate with me in Swedish and say they bring up these things and they try to talk to me like a fellow citizen, and they say like, why aren't you talking about this when it's so obviously a good thing? So that's why I want to address that point. But let's maybe now bring the conversation to Pulse Chain, because I think that's probably one of the things that we want to talk. That was the thing that we wanted to talk in this conversation about in this conversation.
As it turns out, you and I are both quite verbose. So here we are, an hour and 20 minutes in.
Yeah, well, I think it's fine. People seem to like long conversations anyway. If you look at like Rogan interviews,
Rogan.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have video, so I can't smoke a joint on the air here.
And I can't, flex and show my rippling muscles.
Yeah. But I think the people that are interested in this conversation don't mind that it's long. So I think that it's fine. Anyway, so let's bring this to Pulse Chain, because I think that you've made some points now that's going to make the conversation very interesting when we talk about Pulse Chain. Because when we talked about, okay, so why is Hex a superior store value than Ether is? We said that, it's because Ether has this responsibility to secure the network, and there's dilution that happens in the system that goes to the people that secure the system, whereas in the Hex system, you are just piggybacking on top of that already secure platform, and the economic game that is played can all benefit just the holders and the investors. So you don't have to pay miners. You don't have to pay a security budget to securing some cryptocurrency. But if we're now thinking that we're going to do this on Pulse Chain, like Hex is going to exist on Pulse Chain, doesn't that mean that so why are people sacrificing, like why are people investing in Pulse Chain? Why are people so excited about, like, isn't it the exact same thing as Ether? Ether, you say that Ether is just going to be this unreliable mechanism for paying for transactions, like the Ether pays for the transaction fees in the system, but it's not going to be a good store value, because it has to the token itself has to be used to pay for the security of the protocol. But Pulse Chain is exactly that. So Pulse Chain is the same as Ether in that sense that it carries the same negative responsibilities that it has. That the Pulse now needs to create a security budget for Pulse chain. So why would you think that Pulse chain is a good investment and Ethereum is not? Aren't they the same?
That's a great question. So I want to clarify the position that I have on Ether. I think what I don't care for in Ether is that there are multiple narratives being applied to the token that are in tension with one another. And specifically, the store of value is the one that doesn't fit in my view. So the fact that Ether is part of the security budget, or it's awarded for providing security, and is used to pay for compute and storage. That seems fine because that's sort of the core innovation that Ethereum added on top of Bitcoin, was that you could persist more than accounting. You could persist actual code or instructions, and then the outputs of instructions. So those two are fine. It was adding on the narrative of store of value that I think puts all three of those very much in tension with one another, because you wouldn't, for example, if you were a person who believed in precious metals as a store of value, you wouldn't want to send pieces of precious metals to AWS to buy compute credits. Those things just don't work together. You'd rather use something else to pay for compute credits and keep your store of value separate. So to me, there's an issue with the narratives of ETH. Not that ETH is unreliable, but that it's behaving normally, that particularly around DeFi transactions. I'll pause there and then talk about Pulse for a second. So Pulse is a fork of some of the changes that the BSC folks made when they cloned the ETH code base. So the idea is it moves to a proof of stake model. BSC actually has a two-chain solution where the authority for who gets to be a validator actually comes from the BNB chain and is communicated to a contract on BSC, which sort of names the new set of validators. Pulse collapses that into a single chain, so that decision is all made on chain. So there's no sort of external system or external set of token holders that interact with Pulse chain. It's sort of self-contained. It's using the Ethereum virtual machine and is going to be compatible with Ethereum. And the reason for that ties back into what we found to be very frustrating about Ethereum, which is the fact that Ethereum's compute model is shared means that you don't have a fixed cost for the compute tokens that you need to spend. So if I want to do a relatively mundane transaction with Hex, unstake. So I mentioned that there are many strategies where people will set different time horizons for chunks of their Hex. So they may only plan to interact with the contract once a year to pull out some Hex and then maybe restake it. But the fact that they were subject to whatever the cost of compute was in that moment, especially in the summer of DeFi last year, it became prohibitively expensive to do relatively mundane transactions because you were competing with either arbitrage bots or someone had discovered an exploit in the new, whatever system. So there was a competition for network resources that were way outside of the scope of something that you would notice or care about. And that was sort of the idea, why one would build a Pulse chain. And the primary reason that you would have one is so that you could do transactions on it without the existing price and congestion parameters that ETH has. So if Pulse chain can execute all the same code, then you could run your transactions there, and the tokens are going to be plentiful and essentially worthless. I think the goal is to launch at value 0, but even if they get some value. It won't be comparable to the value of Ethereum, I'm sure, for quite a long time. So the pitch is basically around reducing transaction fees so that applications that aren't arbitrage bots and DeFi don't have to compete with those things, or they don't have to pay the exorbitant fees or fluctuating fees to do other kinds of applications or dApps.
Okay, wow. So that's that's a super interesting argument that you've just made, and a couple of weeks ago, I think about 1 week ago, I listed a number of different topics for a long form article that I said that it was a long time ago since I wrote a long form article and I want to write about something, and I listed a number of different things that I want to write a long form about. And one of those things, I can see if I can bring it up here. Yes, I said that one of these things, one of these topics that I wanted to discuss was that you need to have asynchronous execution environments in a smart contract platform. There can't be just one mempool or gas environment for all types of DeFi transactions. So I definitely agree with you, and this is something that I've had like on my to-do list to write a long article about. Exactly what you said, that if you have one contained environment where you are doing a number of different things, but just like exactly like you said, you have some things that are mundane, like just transferring a token, and you have other things that are very high value transactions, like doing arbitrage, where you can afford to spend exorbitant amount in fees, and these transactions will eventually start to if these transactions compete for the same block space, they will bully out the mundane transactions. So essentially, if you don't have asynchronous execution environments, you won't be able to afford to make mundane transactions on that system, because that will be cannibalized by these arbitrage transactions. So I definitely agree with you that this is a problem, and it needs to be resolved. And it's been one of the most I think perhaps important insights that I've had understanding smart contracts ecosystems, because I would consider myself to be one of the people that always said that one of the most important aspects of DeFi is the composability aspect, so that one smart contract can directly interact with another smart contract, and you build this entire ecosystem where you're collaboratively building out a new financial system where everyone can build small components, but they can all be used in conjunctions and layer on top of each other. But this problem then, that you have the same mempool and the same gas environment for all those transactions, becomes a problem. So there's an inherent conflict between composability and then having being able to afford to make mundane transactions. I would perhaps before I would say that I want composability at any cost. I want composability so that we can build this giant DeFi ecosystem that's going to be innovative in so many ways that the current financial landscape isn't. But we can't have that. I mean, it's not going to work. You need to have you need to have separate components, separate environments where transactions are not competing. Like you could, like one way perhaps to address this would be if you would say that, okay, in each block we have one pool, like one mempool for these types of transactions, and we have one mempool for these types of transactions. And then when you form the block, you make sure that there are some just transfers that don't compete for the same block space in the system, so that those transactions can have a low fee because they're not competing with the same block space as other transactions. So maybe it would be possible, but I think that's a very hard. That's very hard to like encode at the base protocol level. Now, I want to bring this back to why this. Go ahead.
I agree, and so one of the companies that doesn't really matter. I've worked for large tech firms out of Silicon Valley and done a startup that was mostly around asynchronous network protocols was our primary product. So I also think about these things quite a bit. Uh, what you're describing, I think, has been proposed as a kind of solution, but I want you to get to your question, but don't let me forget that I have more kind of on that topic.
Okay, that's interesting.
Sure.
Anyway, the reason why I think that it's so interesting that you bring this up is because in Ethereum today, the reason that fees are as high as they are, we just explained that it's because you have all these high value MEV or arbitrage transactions that are competing for the same block space as the mundane transactions. So we know the Ethereum community is well aware of where this problem comes from. But it's very interesting then to in my world to hear that Pulse Chain would be the solution to that problems, and not, the thing that I'm bullish about which are rollups. Rollup solutions, layer 2 solutions in the Ethereum ecosystem, they do give you that exact thing that you want. So you want separate chains, but you want a shared security for all of those chains, and you want those chains to be able to interact with each other, maybe directly or through some extra steps. So the rollup environments are perfectly designed to facilitate what we just described that we want. So what you could have is that, if you take Ethereum as an example, but perhaps a project known as Celestia is an even better example, where you just have a shared base layer, and then you have rollups, and you can put, for example, decentralized exchange activity and arbitrage activity inside a rollup, and then you can have a separate rollup where you just do payments, for instance. So now, using rollups, you would get these asynchronous execution environments that we need in order to keep fees low in the system. Whereas Pulse Chain, in my mind, that's just cloning a monolithic mempool environment that has the exact same problems as the Ethereum mainnet itself has. So in Pulse Chain, how do you don't you think isn't the value proposition of Pulse Chain that you're gonna be able to do smart are you just going to do hex transactions on Pulse Chain? Aren't you also going to have all the nice things that you can do with DeFi on Pulse Chain? Because if you try to do that on Pulse Chain, you're going to go directly back to the exact same type of environment that Ethereum is today. So, in my mind, what you're describing, the problem that you have described, is resolved by creating rollups, not by creating a nearly identical copy of the Ethereum virtual machine and just hoping. How do you even think that that the clone of the same environment, the same virtual machine, is going to resolve the problems when we know that, and we are both saying that we need asynchronous execution environments, and that's the solution?
Mm-hmm. So I can address both of these things. So I personally really like the research and the implementations that have been done so far for rollups. I am partial to the zero knowledge based rollups rather than optimistic. There's a couple of issues. One is just practical. That you and I are not the architects that have been asked how we should solve this. So there is unfortunately going to be some friction in getting the services that need to be on rollups onto those rollups. USDT is probably a prime example. They, as far as I know, have not made any move to move their transfer their transfers. They have not made any move to move those off chain or off L1. So I know DYDX has done a collaboration with Starkware to get onto StarkX, and I want to say Uniswap is doing one of the optimistic rollups.
Yes.
ZK Sync, I think, does Gitcoin grants, and Hex did a massive airdrop with them. So we got 250,000 transfers. So it's not that those technologies are not good. It's that there's a voluntarism that isn't universal.
Just by the
So
way, it's
projects,
just super quickly. It is super easy to just transfer USDT into zk Sync and do the transactions there, even though the Tether team doesn't have to support that in any way. It's just transferring an
I know
ERC.
they don't have to. Oh, yeah, no, I've used zk-sync quite a bit. I know that you don't have to. What I'm saying is that USDT, as a good citizen, should move their primary front end and encourage any dApps that interact with them to move to zk-sync or to StarkX. So that's what I mean by voluntarism, is that I think you and I probably agree that that's a great way to go. You have a very strong security model. It can be off-chain, so you can sort of bring to bear any amount of compute resource that you need. And it's asynchronous. You can kind of delegate your batch compute or offline compute to a separate cloud, essentially. But in practice, not everybody's doing it, and they're not composable yet. So if Curve and Aave, sorry, are those the same project? No, it's CurveFi. No, I think those are different.
Those
projects.
are different
So like,
projects.
so if Curve and Aave commit to two different rollup technologies, then you've lost some protocol level composability. So that's a challenge. So that's technology that we don't have yet. Now, the other, this isn't really a marketing point, but more of a, I mean, it's kind of a Richard point. Richard likes to build products. I mean, Hex was a product that he wanted to build, and Pulse is sort of the outgrowth of his frustration with the ETH ecosystem. He said, well,
Yes,
we can clone what we know works, we can make it cheaper to use, and we can have all the L2 stuff be compatible with our thing also. I think he has an eye towards not cloning it and just leaving it as it is, but it's at least able to have active development.
Okay,
That's not a direct answer to your question about why is it good. Because some of it is not a purely technical decision. Some of this is a Richard decision and a Hex community endorsed decision of, well, we'll just have our own L1. And when the L2s all get their act together and they figure out a protocol to be composable amongst each other, then we really will have sort of this ability to have sort of clouds in orbit around a shared L1. In the meantime, there are bridging protocols from L1 to L1. So from ETH to XDAI and XDAI to BSC, or from BSC back to ETH. I think Matic is in there too, though they technically are in L2, but they're effectively their own chain. We can use bridges to achieve composability across EVMs until we have a robust composable L2 solution.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily, like, if you say that rollups don't have composability between each other and that L1s do, I think that that's not necessarily the case. I mean, it's in rollups you at least have the you have a mainnet that you can all exit to, and you can write smart contracts on that mainnet there, where you restrict the transfers in and out of the rollup, so that if you make a withdrawal to one of these addresses or smart contracts from a rollup, then it can only be put to a certain use, which means that you can, for instance, accept atomic transactions to, like, you don't actually need to wait for the dispute period and everything. You can just accept an atomic swap between yourselves and such a smart contract on the layer one. I know that there are such bridges being built between rollups. It's much harder to build such bridges between layer ones, where if you're saying that you're going to have compose. I don't think that there's composability between Binance Smart Chain and Ethereum, just because you can wrap tokens and then a centralized or a multisig issues copies of that token and keeps it in a multisig for you. I don't think that that's composability. I think that that's actually cleaves composability into two separate environments where you don't have composability. But what I took away from your answer was that you said that so Pulse Chain, the base layer, isn't going to be the thing that solves the gas environment problems. You are going to clone the layer 2 solutions that are being built on Ethereum, and also use rollups as the solution to the environment and the need for asynchronous execution environments. So you're gonna how you're gonna solve the problems of Ethereum is by cloning Ethereum and then trying to solve it in the exact same way as Ethereum, but at the same time potentially buying some more time because you are starting you're just taking a snapshot of the current state, so it's easier. It will be easier, and there will be less activity on the pulse chain in the beginning.
That's actually not easier. Just to clarify, it's much easier if we started empty.
Yeah, I'm just saying to sync pulse chain, it's going to require fewer resources because you start from a snapshot and you don't. Well, now there are sync models in Ether that also allows you to start from a snapshot. Anyway, to the point of the matter is that you do agree with me that you do need asynchronous execution environments. That's how you solve the gas fee environment problems. But you're kind of saying that, well, yeah, we do, but Richard kind of wants control of the layer one, and that the Richard or the Hex community should be involved in making decisions for the layer one because you don't agree with the decisions that the Ethereum community has made. So that's your that's why you think that it's okay to launch this system, even though that it's so similar to the system that you're competing with.
So I think I have a three-part answer. So the first part is composability. I guess I don't want to split the difference on semantics. So we can probably leave that for the time being.
Yeah.
There are protocols that allow you to bridge between EVMs, so we're not trying to become an island, unto ourselves. I think the BSC folks set a good precedent here, along with the XDAI folks, that you can have additional EVMs that can either have some dedicated purpose, and you can move tokens there for that purpose and then move them back. To me, composability for L2s would mean that you could have a StarkX contract that makes a call out to a ZK Sync contract, so that you don't have a centrality issue where you have to sync to L1 and then sync from L1 to the other L2. That's, again, I don't want to split the difference on semantics. I can just drop that as part of the pitch, because it's not a pitch so much as the latter two things. One, the Hex community at large doesn't agree or doesn't prioritize the same concerns that the ETH developers do. So you're right. There is some desire to have different use cases considered when developing new features or refining whatever the model is for the base layer. So that's the Richard builds products, and the community is kind of behind that initiative, that we collectively either have a different set of use cases that we want to try and optimize for, or prioritize different things. The model for inflation is different. I'm actually not as interested in this part, but it is just a fact that there's going to be a capped supply, and that there's just going to be a consistent burn of tokens across time. Now,
yeah, that's I was actually waiting for you to bring up that part because.
Oh, okay. Then let's defer on that. I'll say the third thing, and then we'll do that.
Sure.
So then the third point is, I don't think we are looking, and when I say we now, I'm talking about the team that's working on Pulse Chain. I don't think we're looking to solve anything once and for all. I mean, you were talking about like what's the long-term solution, and this goes back to more. You and I are not the architects of blockchain, because there's some things that I think we would do differently, or that we would work harder to get alignment from dApp developers or very popular tokens to move to L2s, or get the L2s to prioritize working with each other. But the fact that everyone's independent actors, there is a little bit of having to take your destiny into your hands, and that's where the Hex community is, and I think that's where Richard's mindset is. And again, this is an outgrowth of the experience that we've had trying to just do some mundane things once in a while on ETH. So we don't need to solve it once and for all. I don't think Richard has any pretense that he's a galaxy-brained security expert that's going to solve it once and for all. He's making a he had an idea to do a kind of tactical thing that meets his use case. He wants to put his own touches on the product and have some say on what the value hierarchy is going forward.
Yeah.
One of the things that he values is this idea of fee burning and accruing value through reducing supply, which leads you to the point you wanted to make.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, I think that what Richard likes to do more than doing any of these things that you just mentioned is raising money for a new project, because in the Hex system there was an opportunity to buy Hex by sending money to Richard, the origin address, and now you can't do that anymore. So how is Richard going to earn money now that nobody's purchasing Hex tokens anymore? So now there needs to be a new token that you can purchase, and there needs to be a story for Hex. So I think that this is the reason why Pulse Chain came into the picture, and it's very. I mean, I can definitely see that if it costs you $1,000 just to unstake your Hex, then there is a very there's an enemy you can very easily point to and say that this is the enemy, and we need to fight that enemy. And when we're fighting that enemy, I'm going to launch a new coin and I'm going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to go directly into my pocket, and I'm going to address these problems that we currently have. So I would say that I think that this is probably not the last project that Richard is going to launch. I think that that's doing these token sales, selling tokens is immensely profitable, and as long as you can find an excuse to launch a new token, you're going to do that. And I think that we're soon going to see some type of Dan Larimerism being associated with Richard, unless he stops doing this. I mean, at least if you launch a new project, it can't be just we're cloning the EVM and we're cloning the Binance Smart Chain and we're making some very small changes to it, and then because you know how much my other project went up in value, you should definitely invest in this one. And that's, I think, is how what's going on in his mind the most. I don't think that he thinks that deeply about how to actually address the fundamental problems of scalability of smart contracts. He just defers that to other people that can do some of that thinking to him while he makes the big bucks. Anyway, I was asking you previously about, okay, so with Hex versus Ether, then Ether has this in Ethereum. It has this responsibility of paying for the security budget. And I asked you, okay, so how is Pulse Chain going to be different? How can Pulse be a store of value? And I was waiting for you to say, well, in Pulse Chain, there isn't going to be any inflation. There's going to be 0% inflation because the validators only earn from transaction fees. And that's something that I've heard, and I was wondering if that's true, if that's legit.
Yeah,
because,
that's true.
Okay, I mean, I suppose that's both good and bad. It's good in the sense that you can make different arguments in favor of Pulse Chain than you can for Ether, but it's also bad because I mean, have you seen how this thing works in the past? I mean, I think that one of the most beautiful or good things about Ethereum and the recent EIP 1559 upgrade was that you would have constant block rewards in the system, and then you would still have the opportunity to perhaps net out at a 0% net inflation, but there will always be a stable security budget in the system. If in Pulse Chain validators are only earning transaction fees, I mean, do you know how many problems that causes in terms of game theory, reorging incentives, MEV? If the incentive to reorg the chain all comes from the transactions fees, which can change dramatically. I mean, I don't know how much you know about minor extractable value, or MEV, that's often talked about. A huge problem for a smart contract system would be if all the MEV just sits in the transaction portion of mining a block. And because you would have these blocks that anybody would earn so much from being the one that gets to mine those transactions, that there will always be an incentive to reorg, or to act not in good faith with the other miners, to try to get a private access flow to certain transaction types. I mean, this model of having 0% inflation, no block reward, no security budget at all, just relying on these very volatile transaction fees. This is the whole problem with. I mean, that's the main criticism that people raise towards Bitcoin, for instance. That after the rewards are gone, then the system is going to function on transaction fees only. And because transaction fees can be so volatile, you're going to have sometimes a lot of security budget in the system, and then it can drop drastically, and you have almost no security budget in the system. So this is a very controversial design decision to go with 0% inflation. I think that going with EIP 1559, where you try to create a system where the inflation in the system is netted out by a burn, is a much better way to reach 0% inflation than having no block rewards at all. Like, I don't know how you think about that. Don't you foresee a number of MEV type of challenges of having no block rewards in the pulse chain system? Have you run any simulations on that, or observed other systems that have no block rewards and where people only earn fees? Or how can go ahead.
So what I was going to say is, I agree with you, and that this is actually a point of skepticism that I always had with the long-term story for Bitcoin, and here we are. We find ourselves doing that. Honestly, I don't know. I also really liked the idea of EIP 1559. I thought it was a very elegant way to attack the problem. That even in times when there was a net deflation, per block, it was kind of like an iterated prisoner's dilemma. It was still in your best interest to act honestly, because you didn't know if you were going to be slashed or considered untrustworthy. I don't know. I mean, this is a. I don't think it's been either fully explored, or we don't have good examples. We have definitely a lot of reason to be skeptical and think that it's, even if it starts out fine, there may be kind of a clandestine decay of trust within the system.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I don't think I have a good answer to how that's going to work, or or why that's the direction.
Yeah, so
there's consideration there.
that's
for sure.
it's definitely fine to say that instead of coming with a counter argument, just to acknowledge that this is something that perhaps can be improved upon. I think is perfectly fine.
Yeah. As I told you in our chat, I may not have answers to all your questions,
yeah.
and I'm okay with that.
So one thing that we maybe can bring up, and maybe you have some more color to light to shed on this, would be that one of the things that I was looking at the when the pulse chain race was still ongoing. I think it just closed a few days ago. We saw an extremely large amount of hex being sacrificed. And to my understanding, like the money that has been raised for Pulse Chain, and I may have the numbers wrong here, so please correct me if you have better figures. But I think that the what was actually donated from independent parties, or sacrificed or sent to Richard for Pulse Chain was something around a couple of hundreds of millions of dollars, so around like 500 or 600 or 700 millions of dollars that was converted to USDC. But then there were 13 billion dollars worth of hex that was converted to that was sent to the sacrifice address, which would mean that the origin address that controlled 90% of the hex in the hex system now is going to control something like 95% of the PLS tokens, the Pulse tokens. So is that true that this chain is going to launch where Richard is basically, like, if we assume that Richard is the origin address, is it true that this proof of stake chain that is launching with the Pulse chain, 95% of the supply is going to fall into the hands of Richard himself, and there's also 0% inflation in the system, so that 95% can stay 95% forever, because when there's 0% inflation, he's never going to get diluted. In fact, there's going to be fees that are burnt. So if he's just sitting there, that 95% may go even higher. I heard somewhere that you're going to see that Richard's going to lock these tokens up, so he can't use it to participate in the proof of stake consensus mechanism. Do you have any thoughts on the points that I've just raised there? Because I think that everyone in the blockchain industry, just to hear 95% of the supply is going to go to the founder is absolutely ridiculous. Just to start off things.
Yeah, as far as I know, those numbers are correct. I wasn't keeping super close tabs, but that sounds about right. It was 600 or 700 million before that last day, and then the last day. Addresses that I think some folks thought were related to the origin address put in something, like 13 or 14 billion. Again, this is a good question. I think to contrast this with Hex, I think the deal with Hex was that because the currency inflates ostensibly, in perpetuity, that the origin tokens would be diluted as long as they didn't participate in staking, which appeared to be true over the last couple of years. So that they just sort of sat out and then were being diluted over time. You're right that this model works kind of the opposite, that it's a degenerating state. So for it to be diluted, it would have to intentionally run a lot of transactions for no reason to start to remove its own tokens.
But Hex proponents, they enjoy this this thing because the origin address controlling so much of the Hex tokens, it means that if there's a very small portion of the supply that is liquid, and there's even if you look at the daily traded volumes on Uniswap for the Hex token compared to other coins of that size, they're minuscule. But I think that Hex users actually enjoy that Richard gets to control 95% of the supply in these systems, because they know that his long-term incentive is to just make sure that these tokens pump. So he's going to use this position that he's in to just keep reproducing the same chart that Hex has. He's going to reproduce that for Pulse Chain. And if all the projects that he is associated with just have these upward pointing charts, like, why would Hex users complain? Why would Pulse chain why would Pulse holders complain? They actually enjoy the fact that he can sort of corner the market or have the economic muscles to pump his own coins. Even if the reason that he's doing that is just so that he can create another token sale and raise another $700 million on that raise based on the performance of his previous coins. So I don't think that it's necessarily something that the Hex community takes issue with. And I think they call me a communist whenever I bring it up. But of course,
that's a comment.
Yeah. Yeah.
one of the common arguments that was made
Yeah.
early on. So
The-
I'll contextualize that, and I also want to address this point. So I think earlier, just before we switched gears, you talked about Richard's motivations for making these projects was to raise money and enrich himself. I guess I don't want to respond directly to that, because while he and I are friends, and I don't think that's really his motivation, uh, as a philosopher yourself, you know that you can't truly know another person's mind or another person's intentions. I don't read him that way, but other people do, and I can see that. The the difference that I was trying to draw out between Hex and Pulse was that Hex, from the jump, tried to program in the only way that it could, in a fair sense, program in a economically concentrated, or a token, a concentrated ownership in a single party, was through the origin address, because that was part of the pitch. And it was in all the documentation that I wrote. Was, here's the idea: you can lock up coins, you can then participate in inflation, so that you yourself are not diluted, or you can take advantage of market timing things. And there's going to be a party with a high concentration of the coins who should be incentivized to keep the value of those coins high. It's like the two parts of the pitch. Pulse doesn't have part of that narrative. So it, meaning that the centralization is essentially permanent. And so I think folks are, within the Hex community, are seeing a similarity, that this model worked very well for them in Hex. So it seems like it would be likely to work well in terms of pulse price. I want to see it play out. I am curious how it's going to work. I think you're right that it is a bit strange to think about essentially, or ostensibly, an L1 cryptocurrency network that is, for all intents and purposes, able to be mined 95% by one person. That seems antithetical. But my not counterpoint, but my wait and see point is that the origin address did not behave as people anticipated it would. It did not do the things that people thought it would do. And perhaps the address that holds all the pulse may also come up with a very clever thing that it can do. And so I guess I'm not as quick to jump to judgment or just presume that this is part of a pattern of fundraising or whatever. I guess I very much have a more wait and see attitude.
Yeah, no, if I can dial myself back a few. I mean, in this conversation, I'm sitting in the position of the critic, and you're sitting in the position of yourself. I can dial myself back a few notches and steelman your side of the conversation, and actually also I can understand and also think the same thoughts that you're thinking. And if I express it like if I would take a positive view on this, I would say that, first of all, I think that Richard, it is important. The reason that we're talking so much about Richard is because this actor is, I mean, what happens to Paul Shane and what happens to Hex, he's such a central figure, and he's such an economically important actor, being controlling the origin address. I mean, controlling 95% of the supply. Understanding where the system is going to go all comes down to understanding Richard. And I don't think that you can necessarily understand Richard by talking with Richard or debating Richard. All you can do is just try to observe him and put yourself in his shoes and try to think the way that he thinks. And if I do that, if I do put myself in Richard's shoes, and if I imagine that I am Richard, and also I analyze the characteristics of Richard, then, and I would say that one thing that he's really good at, and one thing that surprised me about him, was that when he started building the Hex project, I met him before, like I mentioned in 2018. I met him, and I remember how he was talking about, that he's forking Bitcoin. And then when I met him in Malta, it was like, "Hey Eric, I've created the best thing ever, and you should definitely join me, and you should be on my side of promoting this thing." And I was like, "Richard, like, are you?" Like, how dumb do you think? Like, how you know that I know what you're up to, but so I try to like get it across to him that I can see what he's doing, and he should know that I can see what he's doing because I've known him long enough to see like how he was talking about it previously, and then that it's very strange that it comes up like now that he's raising, now that he's selling hex tokens, it's suddenly the best thing in the world. And I did ask him on that interview in 2019 in Malta, what happened? Like, how did he change his mind, and how did he become so bullish? Like, did he swallow his own? Like, did he buy his own bullshit, or what happened? And I think that if you want to be successful at doing these things that Richard is doing, forming a cult, creating a community, and perhaps all the things that you're doing is not necessarily so obvious that they're good things, like creating an EVM fork and then controlling 95% of the supply should be a pretty obviously like a controversial thing, or at least something that you should feel like you could criticize. But Richard is very good at being able to tell himself that he is doing it for a greater cause. So what I learned with discussing Hex with Richard is that, to my surprise, he is not in his own mind scamming anybody. In his own mind, he actually has come around to the concept that he created himself and learned to appreciate his own creation so much that he actually does believe and feel the way about things as which he says he does. So I think that if you're going to be a good, I don't want to call him necessarily a scammer, but if you want to be a con artist or a scammer, then if you could convince yourself the arguments that you're telling others, you are going to be much more successful if you are able to buy your own story. And if you have a story that you can construct for yourself that does make sense if viewed from a specific angle, then and you're incentivized to agree with yourself. And I think that this is what Richard is doing. He's now agreeing with himself that Hex is amazing. And I think it's the same thing with Pulse Chain, that maybe initially he thought that, okay, I've run out of Hex tokens to sell. I need to come up with a new thing. And then when he is designing that thing, he needs to think about all the counter arguments that is going to come against him. So he's building this rationale, this reason for why he's doing it. And while he's doing that, he's also becoming more and more convinced that what he's doing is actually the right thing to do. So now I don't think that, while I'm saying, Richard is launching a Pulse Chain because he wanted to raise $700 million, Richard could well enough have convinced himself to such a degree that Pulse Chain made such good arguments for why he should be in this position, that he doesn't at all even feel that he feels completely alienated, or that he feels that he's being completely mischaracterized when somebody's saying that he's doing this just to enrich himself. So I think that also you could make the argument, like, if I put myself in Richard's shoes, you could make the argument that he should have raised, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Ether that he raised by selling Hex. And I don't know how much of that was recycled, or if, what exactly happened there. But I think that it is reasonable to assume that he has hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that he already has to his name, that he can move and do enough things to not have to care about money for the rest of his life, basically. So I don't think that money is no longer a motivation to him necessarily, that he doesn't need to keep raising money just to keep making himself richer. He already is as rich as he ever aspired or hoped to be, perhaps. I think that it's more likely that what he's doing now is that he feels that he got into the cryptocurrency community, and then he created hacks, and everyone alienated him, and now he just, what is he going to do with his life now? Is he just going to party on yachts with the money that he has? No, I think that what's much more enticing or exciting for him now is to go to war with all the people that said that he was a malicious actor or that he was doing something wrong. By now, I think that he might be perfectly motivated to just take Pulse Chain, fix the things that he thinks that the Ethereum crowd did wrong, and then use all the money that he has to perhaps set up an ecosystem fund to pay for developers and pay for projects to launch on his chain. And I think that that's what he wants to do. He wants to compete with other blockchain creators at that level and become a dominant, like a powerful person by virtue of having a very competitive smart contract platform. So I would agree with you that it's not, perhaps it's not necessarily necessary to think that, Richard is just saying having very good arguments and saying very nice things about his projects. I think that it is fair to believe that he completely is committed to making these projects successes as well. And we all know that democracies, they work slower. It would be if you could have an authoritarian, a single figure, if you had a benevolent dictator, then that system could be much more efficient. And I think that go ahead.
I wanted to let you say your full piece, I basically disagree until the end. I mean, my perception of him, again, so I came into this not knowing who he was in 2019. So in a sense, I get a sort of fresh perspective in that I didn't have the history with Bitcoin. I didn't have the history with him as a persona. And I just don't get the personality that you're talking about, that there's the self-deception. What I do get is he is a salesperson. This is true. He's an excellent debater and excellent at sales and at communicating his conviction to others. And I also agree with you that debating, in some sense, is counterproductive because the better debater looks more credible, even if the things they are saying are not credible in some objective truth sense. Yeah. He, in all of our conversations, and I feel like I can say this fairly confidently since I have continued to work with him on things, not as his employee, but just as a friend. He's really been motivated by building products. And yes, in the case of Pulse and in the case of Hex, there was a big raise. And in theory, he could do other products that also require a raise. I don't think they will, but I guess time will tell on that. Specifically to your point about now he's motivated to go to war. I think in some sense that is true. that comes through loud and clear in our conversations and in the way that we talk about things. But what you described as the action he takes in that sense is, okay, so he controls an L1 smart contract platform, and he's going to build out a whole ecosystem. And I think he's even said on stream, then you don't even have to talk about other projects. You can just come live in this ecosystem. I'm sort of loath to make the comparison, but you compared him to Dan Larimer earlier. But Block One kind of infamously walked away from their EOS project with a $4 billion war chest that was supposed to go to developer grants and was supposed to go to building an ecosystem and was supposed to go to a bunch of causes that the community thought they were paying for. So if Richard does that, regardless of motivation, isn't that better than the alternative?
Yeah, I think you're right about. I don't think that we necessarily disagree as much about Richard
Oh, okay.
as you think. I do think that uh, coming around full circle on my own description, I'm just describing like what made him, like what made Richard into the character he is today. And I think that a lot of it has to do that. What do you do post money? Like what are your motivations in life after you've raised enough money to
Yeah.
sustain yourself a
So,
lifetime? And I
so
think, yeah,
just let me address that, because that was kind of what I was getting at with what's motivating, and part of what motivated Pulse, because of course he could have just retired and danced the night away on a yacht, forever after Hex, but the constant stream of stories about people who've made positive changes in their life, that's motivating to keep trying to do that. He is really committed to the core tenets of cryptocurrency, about privacy, self-sovereignty, control of your economic life, control of your financial decisions, disintermediation of sort of the things that you want to do with your economic energy. He's very committed to those ideals. And I think people know that, and that is a large part of why people aren't afraid if the starting state looks kind of suspect, for Pulse in
so
a
so it does look like a
decentralized.
benevolent dictator kind of situation here for from the perspective of hex users. They get
Oh, and sorry, I
centralization,
will
but
add one
yeah,
thing. Yeah, so
go
it
ahead.
is centralization in economic ownership, but something critical to note is that every product that he has built and that he and
Yeah,
I have talked
yeah,
about
no, I
building
acknowledge that. Yeah.
always keeps to these core tenets of, no admin keys, no centralized ownership. You're free to interact with it, no data storage, or personal data storage, no KYC, things like that. So I guess that's the other
Yeah,
reason that I feel pretty confident that he is who he presents himself as, is just very dedicated to the core tenets of cryptocurrency.
yeah, no, and like if I was in Richard's shoes, then he and I we do share this that the most important thing that we can probably achieve in our lifetimes is to contribute to longevity research. Because if we are able to make human lifespans long enough to uh, sustain themselves, where they can basically live forever, then we expand what's possible to achieve for a human being. I mean, what's
Yeah,
possible for
absolutely.
either of us. I mean, it's just like it just changes the entire game completely. Like living forever versus not living forever. That's the such a. I mean, you can't even compare. Like I'm thinking about it myself all the time. Like the decisions that I make, are they decisions that make it more plausible for me to reach longevity, escape velocity? And if they aren't, like why aren't I prioritizing all of my decision making to maximize the opportunity for longevity, escape velocity? Because if you are successful in doing that, then nothing else
Yeah,
really matters
absolutely.
in your previous
Then the
human life,
world gets to have John von Neumann and Richard Feynman around still.
right?
Yeah,
But
I'm
also
with
just
you.
for yourself, like being able to live an eternal
I'm
life.
not that great.
We I think that
I'm,
once we get there and the technology is there, like we can. I'm actually, when people say that living for eternity would probably be boring or bad in some sense, I don't think that those people fully appreciate just how much different the future is going to look than the past. I mean, in the future, when we have eternal lifespans, you can, whatever you conceive to be boring, you're going to be able, with technological advances, to not think that those things are boring. If you want to reprogram your own reward center in your brain and the things that you find exciting, all that is going, like the experience of life will be completely up to you how you choose to think and feel about living forever. If you want to live in a simulation that you simulate yourself and you sort of separate your consciousness from an outer layer of a separate mechanism that is just optimizing how much happiness it's able to construct inside the experience of life that you the thread of life that you experience, then you can you can't say that it's going to be boring. I mean, it's like living in the holodeck and everything turns out amazing for you forever, and you don't even know that you don't even know that you are in the holodeck because you erase that part of your own memory. And like,
So if Richard produces holodecks, would you buy one?
I mean, what I'm trying to say is that if you have this longevity escape velocity thing dangling over your head, and that is impacting your decision making, and we both assume that Richard is such a person, then anything that he is doing right now could be subordinate to that longer term goal. And I think that is his goal. So I do think that he is trying to accumulate enough economical power and growth in order to facilitate longevity research so that he can live forever. And I think that in some sense that's the same thing that I'm doing with my life. That's also what I am trying to do. Why do I mention cryptocurrency hedge fund? It is to optimize the probability to reach longevity escape velocity, so that I may have a chance to understand what is the origin of the universe. And I think that Richard is probably like the same type of person. So this, if you think about life that way, then raising a bunch of capital from cryptocurrency investors, it's not. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't really matter in the longevity. The answers to all the questions of the universe and life. Like it's a very small. Like to him, cutting corners in cryptocurrency token sale ethics is probably a tiny thing in comparison to what can be achieved in the future if you are an economically powerful enough actor to fund serious longevity research programs that can eventually reach escape velocity.
So I think it's twofold. I mean, I take your point that there's some ends that maybe justifies means that you find questionable, which I'm typically in agreement with, that the ends don't always justify the means. And in this case, maybe we're splitting hairs on how nefarious the means are. What I'm saying is that in practice, what we have seen, and I think maybe what has changed him, is how he was able to successfully communicate how valuable some of these ideals are. So again, sort of the core tenets of cryptocurrency around self-sovereignty and delaying gratification and financial independence and responsibility with freedom, or freedom and responsibility over your own transactions and decisions. And he gets messages, and I get messages on the regular, that people are changed by thinking differently and come into alignment with him and with some of these core values that make them care about longevity research as well. And I think he has talked about this, about sort of convincing people that it's the most important thing to do. And I think it's succeeding. And I think one of the reasons that he is so frustrated with kind of a lack of acknowledgement is that he's seeing people change for the better. And he's hearing stories from people who have changed for the better. And we're kind of aligned on the same goals. And so it almost feels like nitpicking if someone doesn't care for the way he presents himself, or the way he presents a topic, or even acknowledges that he tried something that people thought would not work, but then it does work, sort of to their consternation. So it's a... It's difficult to explain, but I think he sees himself not just as like a hero. I mean, you painted this picture. I'm imagining that the end of Game of Thrones, which I don't know if you've seen, but the character Daenerys, who everywhere she goes, she's freeing slaves, but in the end, she burns everyone to death. Yeah. So that there's not necessarily this fall from grace where you see your own good actions, and so then you start doing bad actions. I think people don't think there are bad actions coming. There's not a madness lurking there, because he could at any point just disappear or ride off into the sunset and get on a boat. So, and that's largely why I feel totally comfortable with a wait and see kind of approach.
Okay.
I don't understand how it's going to work out long term. I feel like I don't have that foresight, but it seems well motivated, and I know the person behind some of the ideas, and I'm willing to wait and see.
It seems like there's one aspect here that, like, you seem like a completely reasonable and fair individual in your assessment, and like you think for yourself, and I respect that. But it feels like there's one aspect to all of this which you have just described, which is there's a conflict or hypocrisy here that I'm not sure if you have noticed. So you say that Richard is committed so much to the core tenets of cryptocurrency, of decentralization and self-sovereignty. But isn't it true? Isn't it true that the origin address in hex could dump the price to zero by just now it's now yeah, it's actually the same. I was going to say that the origin address is donated. It's a hex tokens. It doesn't own it anymore, but it was donated to Richard himself. So that doesn't really work. But isn't it true that you have to, in the hex system, for the value of hex to keep going up and everything, as Richard, the things that Richard say about hex, for those things to be true, you do have to trust Richard. You have to trust the origin address to be well motivated and not be looking for an exit. And isn't that something that is completely in counter direction to the core tenets of cryptocurrency? I mean, he wants to eat the pie and have it too. He wants to say that we care about self-sovereignty, and we don't want you to trust anybody. We don't have any admin keys, but then putting himself in the position of controlling the value of these projects so much that there's an enormous buzz factor, and he wants everyone to just trust him and think that he is aligned and incentivized to do what's good for pulse chain users, what's good for hex users. But that's completely counter to what the actual core tenets of cryptocurrencies are, which is that you're trying to decentralize power, you're trying to decentralize control, you're trying to eliminate points where if somebody got hacked or somebody turned malicious, could destroy the value of the currency. So, but he's putting himself in that position. At the same time, he's spreading the gospel, and it seems like you have completely bought into that he does believe in these values, and and you share his values, and that the people that believe him and also share those values. But how does that match with him having such an undue economical weight in these systems?
So I think that's a good question, but I don't feel that that's hypocritical, or really even in conflict with itself. Unfortunately, I can't give you a full answer because I have to go pick up my kids from school. But I'll give you a short answer. Maybe we can do a part two.
Okay.
The short answer is that, granted, I was there at the beginning, so maybe this was much more clear to me than to other people, but I wouldn't put my life savings in Hex. I mean, it is a product with a particular pitch, and you should allocate your money to it insofar as you think that it has a chance of success. So to me, the question is not, do I trust Richard with my life savings, or do I trust an origin address with my life savings? It's, this sounds like a good idea, or this sounds like a bad idea. If it sounds like a good idea, what is the risk that it doesn't work, and what am I willing to allocate towards that? The other tenets about sort of self-sovereignty and freedom and responsibility are about holding your own keys. The contract will only interact with the address that connects via MetaMask, for example. So to me, all of those things hold true, and decentralization, to me, is just literally the idea of peer-to-peer transactions that can be validated independently, that you can publish public proof of transactions. That doesn't necessarily, that is not the same as economic centralization. So yeah,
Okay.
this feels like a much longer conversation.
Yeah. So how many more minutes do you have before you have to run off? Is it
negative 1 minute?
Oh, okay. Okay. I guess I'll have to wrap up without you then and just let you go. I'm gonna try to wrap up the conversation that we had and just communicate
Okay.
some of that. I don't know. You probably
Yeah,
don't
and
have time to
I'm sorry
listen
for
to
the
it.
short notice. I think, again, we're both very verbose, and so I
Yeah.
probably should have said something 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, that's completely fine. I'll just wrap up on my own. And thank you so much
Okay.
for participating in this very long conversation, and appreciate all the arguments that you have brought up. And I thought that they were well articulated and well argumented, and I don't have any disagreements with you as a person. So
Thank you very much.
we're all good.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for setting this up.
All right. Okay. I hope so. All right. So I'm just gonna, you two, I'm gonna move forward now to wrap up, and it's sad that Kyle isn't here. All right, so the recording just stopped when Kyle dropped off Zencaster, so I'm gonna take some time to just wrap up the last parts that I wanted to get across. It's sad that Kyle won't be here to comment, but hopefully he can perhaps record his comments on his own afterwards, after he's heard mine, or he can just leave them as a comment somewhere so that people can hear his side of how I'm wrapping this up. So, people ask me about what I think about Hex, and I give my opinion on that, and I try to do it fairly. And now with the Pulse Chain launch, people are asking me again, so what do I think about Pulse Chain? And I have said very negative things about Pulse Chain in the public eye. And I want people to be able to understand, like, why am I saying negative things about Pulse Chain? You've listened to this entire conversation, but to sort of wrap up, what is Pulse Chain? Like, what is this project? And if you come to me and, I'm sitting in the chair of a cryptocurrency critic, I don't necessarily think that, I'm not making an assessment of the Pulse Chain price. I think that that's completely orthogonal to the question of whether or not Pulse Chain is good or not. So I'm going to address the technical platform here. So what you have done, to my understanding from speaking with Richard and Kyle, is that you've collapsed Binance Chain and Binance Smart Chain into one, which Kyle just described, and that seems like a good thing to do. I mean, you don't want two separate chains, one chain to decide which the validator set is for you on another chain. That's unnecessary complexity that makes complete sense to collapse into a single system, which Pulse Chain is. It's not exciting enough on its own to make this project exciting. You have to remember that there are dozens of high-profile, well-funded, well-researched smart contract platforms competing out there. And in terms of technological innovation in the smart contract and specifically the EVM space, I would say that Binance Smart Chain is, probably the cheapest shot. It's the chain that has done the least amount, or among the chains that have done the least amount of actual innovation in terms of improving any part of the Ethereum system. I mean, if you look inside the Binance Smart Chain codebase, you're going to see that it's just a fork of the Geth client. Like it's a direct fork of the code that the Ethereum developers wrote, and then they built a very primitive, unimpressive proof of stake mechanism on top of that. That is not, unique or mentionable or doesn't have any interesting synchronicity or liveness properties compared to anything else. That it's just like the standard the most boring instance of a proof of stake system. It's not something that allows for an extremely large validator set, or for the chain to progress, even if more than a third of the network is offline. It's just a very, very basic, boring proof of stake mechanism that is latched on top of the Geth code. So Binance Smart Chain is technologically unimpressive in and of itself, and the only interesting thing, or the only good thing that the Binance Smart Chain has, is that it has direct on ramps from Binance, which is the largest cryptocurrency exchange. So that's the only reason that Binance Smart Chain is interesting in any capacity whatsoever. So now what Pulse Chain is that it's a fork essentially of Binance Smart Chain. So it's carrying the torch from Binance Smart Chain, which is a terrible place to start from a technology standpoint if you're trying to compete with Ethereum, because it's just a poor man's version of what Ethereum is trying to become. So you take that code, and then you don't have any direct on ramps from Binance anymore. And yes, it's true, you collapse the Binance chain and the Binance Smart Chain into one. But like I said, that's not that important, or it doesn't make this product any more exciting. Then you've made a couple of other changes to the system that we know about. And one of the things that we know is that, so they've increased the throughput 4 times by using a 3-second block time. We all know that's not scaling the system. It's just centralizing the system more, because it will be the state of the Pulse chain is going to grow faster than the Ethereum system does. So it's more resource. It's going to be on the long term more resource intensive to keep up with this increased throughput than it is, and it's already difficult to validate the Ethereum system today. So increasing throughput 4x while not actually introducing any scalability benefits to the system is that's just not impressive in any way at all, and it's just a very centralized EVM that's being created here. Then we can think about, like, how does this system start? Like, how does it sync? Like, what's the starting point here? And that's the point where Pulse Chain is very interesting, and that's the main reason that I've followed this project to begin with, is that compared to other EVM forks, Pulse Chain is also, it's taking a snapshot of the current Ethereum state. So all the dApps that are deployed, all the balances, all that stuff is copied over to Pulse Chain. So when Pulse Chain launches, it's already going to have smart contract applications like Compound, Aave, Curve, all those applications, and MakerDAO, all of those applications are going to be like installed in the chain. However, almost all smart contract applications in Ethereum today rely on some admin key, some manual Oracle input that can only be generated by a specific set of private key holders. That's not going to be active on Pulse Chain. So you take all of the state, but you don't take any of the maintenance of that state with it, which means that all of that code, all of that state is going to collapse in terms of what it's able to achieve and what it's able to do. It's going to like all those smart contracts applications that are running on Ethereum today, they're going to be graveyards inside the Pulse Chain, in the Pulse Chain blockchain. So they're going to be there, but as soon as they don't get the Oracle responses that they want, there's nobody updating the prices on these decentralized exchanges. There's nobody updating the prices on the lending platform, lending applications that exist on the blockchain. So all those things are just going to turn into rubbish, and there's going to be liquidations happening all across these smart contract applications. And the ERC20 values, like the value that is associated with these ERC20s, that is all over the Ethereum project, like the Uni token, the Curve token, Aave token, all of those tokens, because they inherently either need to be maintained or depend intimately on the dependency of other projects. All of that is going to collapse on itself, and these ERC20 tokens are going to become valueless, and all that state that you've installed in the Pulse chain is just going to be several gigabytes of state that you need to that your node needs to manage, but it doesn't actually do anything. It's just a graveyard. So you have the Binance Smart Chain with all the unimpressive technical characteristics of the Binance Smart Chain without the on-ramp of Binance. And you have the state bloat of Ethereum without the benefit of any of the smart contract applications or the ecosystems that are running there. That's the starting point of Pulse Chain. And then we talked about how there's 0% inflation, so there isn't a consistent security budget in this chain, which means that the game theory that is being promoted as improved here is in fact this is going to be a pretty crazy experiment that has all the security budget aspect problems of Bitcoin when all the Bitcoins have been mined in the year 2140. All those problems that people are so worried about in Bitcoin, all those problems are going to exist on Pulse Chain, but it's also going to be a smart contract platform where the incentives for miners or validators to reorg transactions are much higher, because there's much higher value transactions in smart contract platforms than there is in a system like Bitcoin. So you're taking the worst of so many words. You're taking you're taking the security dilemma of Bitcoin into Pulse Chain. You're taking the Ethereum state bloat into sorry, did I say into Bitcoin? You're taking the security budget problem of Bitcoin into Pulse Chain. You're taking the state bloat problem of Ethereum into Pulse Chain. You're taking the unimpressive technology stack of Binance into Pulse Chain without the Binance on-ramp. And then you are trying to run this system 4 times faster by decreasing block times to 3 seconds. So you're centralizing things by making the system much more resource intensive than Ethereum already is. So when people come and ask me, what do you think about Pulse Chain? I mean, if you heard the conversation between me and Kyle, it seems like I do have an accurate understanding of what Pulse Chain is. There was no discrepancy, or there was no oh, but you don't actually know how the system is built. We do agree on what the technology stack is. And when you hear me describe this from a technological standpoint, how can you expect me to say that this is a good project? I've almost never seen pieces put together in such a reckless way as I see with Pulse Chain. I know that the Hex community, and the Pulse Chain community, they talk about the S load, the opcode S load that has a gas cost that's hard coded in Ethereum. That is one of the reasons why unstaking in Hex has become so expensive, is because somewhere along the line the gas cost was hard coded to be much more expensive than it was previously for S-load opcodes. And but the reason that, if I recall it correctly, and if you read the Ethereum improvement proposal that made this change, they made that change based on, and it was Martin Svende, it's a Swedish Ethereum developer, that made that change because S-load opcodes created a resource they burdened the Ethereum system resource constraint wise in such a way that it was unfair to the other transactions. That S loads were basically too cheap. It was too cheap to basically DDoS or denial of service attack the Ethereum system by the virtue of these S load functions being too cheap. So it's not like the Ethereum system or the Ethereum developers just decided to up the price of S load without having a motivation to do so. It was because they believed it was for the long-term sustainability of being able to sync and run an Ethereum node that they made those transactions cost more. So if you are changing, if you're reverting that change, yes, you can get cheaper transactions, but you're going to get a system that is much less decentralized than the current instance of Ethereum. And now remember that we're doing this in conjunction with increasing the throughput by 4 times. So I don't know how anyone could, say that this system fits well into the core tenets of cryptocurrency. I mean, this is going to be a very, very centralized EVM fork with 95% of the mainnet tokens centralized into Richard Hart's address. I really don't understand how people expect that I am supposed to have positive things to say about this project. Like, the only positive thing that I can say about the project is that, and this is something that probably everybody already knows, it's there's going to be a lot of hype for the Pulse price, the Pulse chain price, because the Hex token seemingly did very well. And I say seemingly because all we know about the Hex project is that it's a very high market cap coin, but the volumes are minuscule. The volumes are tiny in comparison to the overall market cap. So, it could be argued that whoever earned all the money from raising from selling Hex tokens could easily, if he wanted to, have pushed up the price of Hex. I'm not saying that happened, and I'm not saying that necessarily even had to happen in order for the Hex price to reach the point where it has. I think it was very easy to take the Hex price to where it is because you have 90% of the supply controlled by a single address, and then it's just the rest of the tokens that you need to push up in value. And if that's traded on a very illiquid token pair on Uniswap, which has happened, which has been the case for Hex, then that's not an inconceivable thing to do. So, I do want to tone down the extent to which the Hex price appreciation has been Herculean. I think that it's this could have been one of the cases where not necessarily price manipulation, but it could be the case of where you have very few actual buyers that are contributing to bringing the price that high. I think perhaps in the later stages and in conjunctions with the Pulse chain launch, we've seen an increase in demand for Hex because people knew that if they just bought Hex, they would get a Hex on the Pulse chain, and they would keep the Hex on the Ethereum chain, but they would also be able to participate in the Pulse chain raise at the very, very high valuation of Hex. Whereas if you try to use another token to donate with, then the sacrifice, the recipient, which is in this case Richard, was going to sell those tokens. But in this case, all the Hex that was sent to the sacrifice address is being sent to Richard. They're not being sold, which means that you're taking even more Hex out of circulation. So you're kind of creating this event where you say, okay, the supply of Hex is going to be constricted even more than it already is. And if people know that, and that's an event that's going to happen in the future, then that creates an incentive to get into Hex now. And I think that has been probably the reason why the Hex price has gone up. We don't even need to think about, did Richard manipulate this price or not? I think that just by setting up this system the way he did, by saying that I'm doing this token sale and you can send hex, you can purchase this new Pulse token with hex, but I'm not going to sell the hex. Just by that aspect alone, you can get the flywheel running out of itself, because people will then think that hex is going to go up in value, which it has, and the more it goes up in value, the more people get interested and also buy hex. So it has this recursive effect. So yeah, what else to say? There's even after having had this conversation with Kyle, I didn't hear anything about the value proposition of hex. I was a bit surprised that he said that, hex is not positioned to become a currency. It's not something that we see as a competitor to BTC or Ether in terms of becoming a medium of exchange. It's more of a store value asset. But it's very hard to create a pure store value asset without having any legs into the currency actually being used as a currency, because if you want to make something very valuable as a store value, then that sort of naturally needs to tie in with being a good medium of exchange as well. I think that perhaps those arguments are better associated with perhaps the Bitcoin Cash community, but it's not like you can. I think that if Bitcoin just tried to be a store value, then it would be gunning for perhaps a market cap that gold has, which is $10 trillion. But if you want Bitcoin to be a hard form of money, something that people are transacting with every day, you're going to expand the number of people that actually choose to use this also as a store of value way beyond that you could have if you just used it as a pretty arcane store value that only a few people use. I think the reason that why gold is just $10 trillion is because only not a lot of people invest in gold. Only 12% of Americans, to my understanding, use gold as an investment. But if we were transacting in gold every day, and you had this benefit of the supply of gold being capped, you wouldn't feel the same need to go and allocate to the real estate market, or the need to buy security indices like the S&P 500 if you had a hard form of money. But if you take out the monetary use case of transacting with it, and if you just want it to be a store value, then I think that the potential market cap of that currency is much, much lower. And it seems like that is the case then here for Hex, because it's not trying to be a medium of exchange. It's just trying to be a store value. So the potential market cap of Hex becomes much smaller. And I wasn't successfully convinced. I mean, you heard the discussion that which we had, which was around, okay, so if you hold Hex, do you actually get any benefit from these other people locking up their Hex if those people that lock up their Hex were already people that were aiming to be long-term holders of Hex? I mean, you have the same aspect in Bitcoin, right? You have Bitcoin users. Some of them are long-term holders, and some of them are transacting with Bitcoin. And now those people that are long-term holders, yes, they do. They are the ones that are contributing to the Bitcoin price going up so much, but they are already incentivized to hold Bitcoin. You don't need to attach this extra economical gain where they can stake their Bitcoin and receive an inflation in Bitcoin in order for people to do that. You already have long-term holders. And I think in the case of Hex, who knows if there was no staking feature, if you made the currency itself interesting enough by having let's say, a layer one that was scalable or private or flexible or dynamic enough for the base currency to be interesting of itself, you would have natural holders. So you don't necessarily need this CD mechanism in order for the price of a cryptocurrency to go up. I mean, look at the price of Ether, look at the price of Bitcoin. They have reached much higher market caps than Hex has, and there was never the necessity for holders to additionally lock up the tokens that they were already planning to lock up. So I don't think that there is this tremendous innovation that is being brought into the world by this staking feature of Hex. I still think that it's kind of redundant. I'm not going to say that it's the dumbest thing that I've ever heard in my entire life, but I think that it's kind of redundant and not very special. It's also, doesn't really seem to have any moat. Like this feature could be constructed for any cryptocurrency, but the reason that nobody's doing it is that why would you want this feature in your system? I think that why they're doing it in Hex is because it creates this casino-like experience where you can earn a yield by staking your Hex, but you can also speculate on trying to time when is the best time to sell by staying liquid. So it creates this dynamic and game which a lot of people wants to participate in. I think that that's the value proposition of the CD, is to create this economical game that people think that they can outsmart and that they can participate in. But I don't think that it's an interesting mechanism outside of that. You could argue, well, this is bringing in demand to Hex, and therefore it is a good mechanism. I suppose you could make that argument, but I don't think that creating attractive speculative games is necessarily the thing that we should be focused on if we're trying to build sustainable systems in cryptocurrency. I mean, all that has to happen for people to not want to participate in the Hex game anymore is that there's a huge sell-off, and all those staked token holders get burnt. I think that such an event, if there's a big, musical chairs event here where everyone's trying to escape the game and the price collapses, that could be a death nail that could be the thing that causes people to think, okay, well, it's over, or let's move over to the next project or the next casino game. So by having this casino-like game built into the currency, you are also building in this risk of a big dump that ends the interest in the project. So I don't think that it is a sustainable game or a sustainable cryptocurrency in that sense that this CD would inspire me to talk in a positive light about Hex. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm just being transparent with what I think. If this is of any value to you, if these thoughts are of any value to you, I'm happy for you. If you think that I'm an idiot and this was rubbish and a waste of 3 hours of listen, then maybe you're gonna stop asking me to opine on matters surrounding Hex and the Pulse Chain projects in the future, and just leave me alone, so that I can tend to the things that I care about. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Hex and Pulse Chain now. Let's see, is there anything? What's the last thing that I should say? Oh, I suppose that there are people that watched the Hex interview with me and Richard back in 2019, and want to hear, oh, how does it feel to be like, if you had just listened to Richard and if you had just bought Hex, then you would have made so much money. Don't I feel stupid now? Well, I mean, I guess it's completely fair to say that if I had bought Hex, then I would have made more money than if I didn't. Hex has outperformed. I don't know, most of the time when you're looking at the performance of Hex, it's measured from like when the currency was trading just at very few Satoshis. And I don't think that the people that bought Hex at the initial point that it was offered actually got all that value appreciation. I think that when you look at some of those charts on TradingView, it's measured from a little bit later point in time. So you measured from its low point until where it is now, and you get this very, very high APY. But I'm not saying that Hex hasn't been a very good investment. Probably has, and I probably would have made a bunch of money if I did invest in the project. However, if you listen to that interview that I had with Richard, I didn't say that the Hex price is not going to go anywhere. I said that he's creating a casino-like game that doesn't provide that much value to the Ethereum, the cryptocurrency ecosystem, or the space of innovators that's trying to push the limits of what's possible to create with these currencies. And in a casino-like game, yes, the price can go up a lot. And if I had understood, if I knew how committed Richard was going to be to this project and wasn't as skeptical, then that would have seemed like a better deal at that point in time. But at that point in time, I was very skeptical about Richard's commitment. And yes, I was perhaps being too skeptical of how committed he would be. So yeah, I was wrong about that. Does that mean that people should not value anything I have to say about Pulse Chain? I think that's completely up to them. If the reason that I'm recording this is because people are continuously asking about the opinions that I have about Pulse Chain, and I think that perhaps by recording this podcast, I can highlight some details, some information about the project that perhaps wasn't known before, and I can also offer my thoughts. But yeah, don't have anything more positive to say about the Pulse Chain project than that. But once again, like I've said throughout this podcast, the price could go up a lot. And if you choose to make an investment, good luck to you. I personally would be skeptical to recommend an investment in this project. But I'm not going to say that I'm not going to take a bearish bet on the price, given how much bullishness I know that there is surrounding this project and how successful Rich has been at constructing positive pumpamentals for Hex before. I think that he can definitely pull something off in terms of the price of Pulse Chain. But I don't think that it's going to be a serious competitor in the smart contract space 1 year from now. So if you want to call me out 1 year from now and say, listen to how wrong you were, then maybe that's a point that you can challenge me on, and I'll be happy to admit defeat if that happens. All right. Thanks for listening.
So this is Kyle responding to Eric's rap. I don't want to make new points that he doesn't have an opportunity to speak to or clarify. So I've taken some notes from the points that he made, and I just want to try and address those things to the best of my ability. Or if I feel like I can't, then I'll just say so. And I'm going to go in reverse order, starting from the most recent thing that you heard, working backwards. So first, he said, come bother him in a year, if Pulse is wildly successful or not, I suppose. So you heard it, beginning of August of 2022. We'll probably sync up again, or at least I'll try to, just to see where we are, see what's happened, and we'll revisit then. So he mentioned that people may level the criticism, hey, don't you feel dumb? You didn't buy Hex in 2019. I guess I just want to support him in the fact that there's more important stuff than price bump. He seems like a person who's very, very interested in technical fundamentals and is looking for new, interesting technological solutions to problems. So I guess if I were him, I wouldn't take that as a criticism. It's just different things important to different people. And in his role in particular, it makes complete sense. why he wouldn't just be, looking for, price action only, especially if it's inexplicable to him why price go up. There needs to be a coherent narrative that a thing is good and solves a problem in a unique or an interesting way. Let's see. There was Hex. This is kind of one combined point about Hex as a sort of pure store of value play, not meant to replace currency or spendable currency. Seems like a casino game. Games are not sustainable, etc. I guess what I would ask is to at least think about what is the threshold of falsifiability? Like what makes a thing sustainable or not sustainable? People throw that word out, but do they mean, like, what time frame are we talking about? I think in that interview with Richard in 2019, you were excited about Ethereum 2.0. Well, here we are, 2021. It's not live yet. I mean, the beacon chain is live, as we discussed, but it's not live. So if 2 years is long enough to still be excited, what is the threshold of sustainability? So I guess I don't want to directly address whether a thing is or is not sustainable unless we agree what we're talking about in terms of time frame. So there was about the casino game thing, staking versus long-term holding for Bitcoin. Maybe this isn't clear from the mechanism, but Bitcoin, when you have it and you hold it, you have a known limit of the percentage of total supply that you control. So everybody has targeted 21 million as the maximum possible total supply. So holding, you will never be diluted in terms of your percentage of ownership. Hex has the inverse characteristic that it inflates indefinitely, and your mechanism to maintain a non-diluted status is staking. So maybe this is clear, but it's not connecting sort of viscerally that, in fact, you're making a decision how much of your hex stack you want to remain undiluted or in fact gain advantage if you have a longer time horizon than the average staker. Maybe that's still a game to you, but I just want to be clear with folks that this does have an analog to just long-term holding with Bitcoin, which I think Eric brought up specifically, that long-term holders hold the price up for Bitcoin, so why do you need this extra game in Hex? And what I'm saying is it's not an extra game. It is the mechanism that mimics what long-term Bitcoin holders do by choosing long time horizons. So he mentioned no moat. All I'll say is people have tried to copy Hex, and you didn't know about them to even mention them. So there seems to be at least an ineffable quality that's name probably rhymes with Richard Hart that cannot be copied, and maybe that's moat enough. I don't know. I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek. Truly, there have been rip-off projects that have not done very well in terms of price or even awareness in industry. You mentioned that a pure store value may not be a play, and that if we transacted in something like gold, maybe people wouldn't diversify as much. I actually don't agree. I think historically, the examples run completely contrary to that. Gold-backed currency was a thing until World War One in the great powers of Europe. Wars are expensive, so they had to break the gold standard and borrow money from the U.S. World War II was expensive and ultimately led to leaving the gold and silver standards in the U.S. Because we needed flexibility in money supply. So I'm not convinced of that because we still had a stock market, we still had a real estate market, we still had other clever ideas about how to deal with this abstract notion of wealth and of investment. Corporations existed as early as the 1600s with the British East India Company. Um, that was a contemporary of gold and treasure and pirates and stuff. So I think these things can all exist in parallel, and some of it is about what people value in the characteristics of those things. Some of it is speculative value. So stocks have always been considered a speculative instrument. Um, yeah, so that's that point. Right. Transaction. So as we mentioned, you can choose some amount of your hex stack to be liquid, kind of like a checking account, which people do in their day-to-day life, and we do transact in it. I mean, it can be transacted in, and because it operates on the Ethereum network, it has some advantages there. I I didn't really talk about it because just because you can doesn't mean that that is the point. And much like having the vast majority of your wealth in investments, uh, you still have some cash that you need to pay bills or just have on hand, for cravings, things like that. I said cravings is, I guess, kind of a Freudian slip because I'd like to go buy some snacks. But yeah, just regular day-to-day transacting. But it's not the majority of your wealth. So much like I think I joked about shaving off a sliver of your gold and mailing it to AWS, there are reasons to transact. And I think Hex has advantages there, but that is not the pitch that it's making. Unlike Bitcoin, which in the original white paper had this underlying premise that, hey, couldn't we do peer-to-peer payments? And this could be like peer-to-peer cash. I know that that hasn't stuck. We've evolved a lot since then, but I'm just mentioning it to try and close the point. It's not that it can't, that's just not its primary pitch. Let's see, the next point back. Oh, I wanted to compliment your use of the word Herculean. Most people, most people don't use that word. I guess we are now two people that do. So you did mention that the price goes up on Hex, so Pulse will probably pump. I think you mentioned this during our conversation, and I wanted to address it, that building a track record of tokens or coins whose price goes up only begets new projects having the faith of the public that price will probably go up. There's not much to respond to here. I get the sense that you're looking for different things when you evaluate projects. I know that Richard is very fixated on price as sort of a flag for who's winning. And for a lot of people, it makes a big difference. I think we talked about this during the main, or at least the simultaneous portion. It makes a big difference in people's lives. When the price goes up on the assets that they hold, or the assets that they're looking to get into. Uh, it depends on perspective. So I guess I feel somewhat sensitive to that because I hear from people who are not big whales, people who for them this is a 1% allocation or maybe a 5% allocation in their portfolio, or they don't have a portfolio and this is sort of a hopeful speculative instrument, and they have real problems, and the price jumps make a huge difference in their lives. And I can appreciate that at the level that you're operating, that's not a selling point. That it's not, it doesn't make a difference to your clients or to the people that you advise. So I guess I would just acknowledge that's true. People followed Dan Larimer to EOS because he had a track record of delivering projects. If Richard builds a track record or a further track record of delivering price up, that will probably convince people that the next thing will be price up. Um, I'm just acknowledging that as a fact, and that you have a very different perspective, and I can appreciate that. I don't know that much more needs to be said there. Gas costs for opcodes. I know Richard has spoken about this, that he was not sufficiently convinced that that attack was real. From what I've read, the Shanghai event or the Shanghai attack was trying to take advantage of this, where there was an asymmetry in terms of the opcode cost versus its relative difficulty to execute on nodes. And so you could clog up blocks with difficult to process transactions, but not reap substantial fees. I'm I'm honestly not convinced that that was the right solution. Clearly, there needs to be a tactical solution if there is an imminent threat of something that's going to reduce the availability of the blockchain. Obviously, you're a computer scientist and good at consensus and probably know about the CAP theorem. But if availability is the thing that we care about, we obviously don't want nodes to be taken offline either because they're inoperable or because they can't um, actually execute the writes that you ask them to. On balance, I don't think Pulse is actually going to roll that change back. I think the intent is just to roll forward and just make the tokens so cheap that you can execute the operations anyway. This actually goes, to my eye, more to the tension between Ethereum as a very valuable asset, but also being exchangeable for compute time. There's just a problem there. Something has to be done to keep that cost down, or at least predictable, and that is the fundamental failure of the Ethereum folks, rendering quite a few use cases. Obviously, we're talking about Hex, but quite a few use cases were just rendered unusable because of this. There's also a point that I don't think you touched on, but that was definitely talked about in very heated terms by not just me, but the main Hex dev and uh, Richard and a few other folks. The fact that the platform can change underneath you, it makes it very difficult to say with certainty that you can write a product or a dApp that is immutable or that doesn't have admin keys or that cannot be changed with confidence. And this was a big issue. This was one of the primary motivations for the way that Hex was written, that it would never need to be changed. It would just be essentially an eternal fixture in the network. And the fact that opcodes could change or be deprecated, or versions of Solidity or the ABI encoder, it don't work quite right. Like, these were all considerations, but then after the fact that retroactive changes can be applied makes it very difficult. It's an inherently unstable platform. Now, does Pulse address that? Not necessarily, which I will get to. But uh, I just want to at least put that point out there, that the fact that the platform can change out from underneath you is the cause, and then this opcodes thing was sort of a symptom. And convinced or not about the motivation for changing those particular opcodes, the fact that they can change and then maybe render some contracts unusable, that's a real problem. You talked about the security dilemma of basically starting in a fees-only security model. To my eye, I can see from your point of view that that would be a risk. You would consider that a platform risk. And I think you'd be right to do so. It'd be responsible to do so, to tell potential investors, to advise your board that there is this risk, that we are in uncharted territory. And I'm in a very different position. I don't see it as threatening as that. And that's because I don't have to, hold to those kinds of commitments, and I don't have that much writing on my opinion. I think it is an experiment. I think that this space needs more experiments and less tribalism. I think people need to be, in general, less opinionated about which experiments are good or bad, and less opinionated on what makes something a good experiment or a bad experiment. And in this case, frankly, the Bitcoin community is getting a preview of what they're going to be facing. So to my eye, there is benefit to the ecosystem to run the experiment. And you're doing it on the backs of people who believe in the project, who believe in Richard's ability to deliver, and his commitment to delivering improvements if they're necessary. There's a point there about trustfulness that I try to remember to get to at the end. So I also touched on experiments. This is an experiment. There are some changes that, including the security dilemma, that I think are worthy experiments. And hopefully you took from our talk that I really view this space as experimental. And in general, while I am also a tech nerd and I really like sort of insight porn I think is the term that I really like for this, where you go, oh, that's so cool. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. I also like kind of mundane experiments, product experiments. Is this a good idea? Is this going to connect? As I mentioned, was with a startup for almost 2 years, and the tech was so fun to work on. So fun. It was so interesting. There was so much that we thought we could do. But the demos for customers had to be so boring because they didn't care. They weren't interested at that level. What they wanted were products that solved problems that they actually had. And in some sense, I kind of learned to be interested in those kinds of experiments. And I don't have the responsibility of being an advisor to a hedge fund. So I don't have to view it that way. To me, it can be an experiment and it can fail, and that's okay. We can pick up the pieces, we can try again. So you've mentioned that we're bringing along a lot of state trash, essentially. You said graveyard, but it's just, garbage, or it becomes, unusable. Uh, to me, this is kind of maybe a blessing in disguise, or kind of the point, maybe simultaneously. So quite a few dApps rely on external parties to update their state, whether it's an external oracle, or use keys to authorize certain things, or like I'm thinking of DYDX, they have an admin key to authorize new oracles. You mentioned a couple of other DeFi products that need to be prodded occasionally with Oracle updates. There are going to be lots of dApps that just don't work because the front ends will never update, and they're closed source. So that's true. That is the downside. Uh, the upside is that, one, some apps will become usable again. There's sort of this second opportunity to reach out to dApps that failed because they were too expensive to run. That's probably a very tiny minority, but it does matter that it's not just Hex and Hex alone. I think that is the experiment, kind of in a nutshell, is can we clone all this stuff, change the base layer rules a little bit, and run a bunch of these dApps for cheap? And if there are a bunch of other dApps that stop working, one, you'll realize how trustful they were. And I've now used this a second time, so I'm going to make sure to expand on that point because it was sort of what we ended on. You'll realize how trustful they were, but also you'll get to kind of test the boundaries of what you can do with a zero interaction system. So there are going to be things like, can you still interact with those contracts, or are they truly zombies? They're just sort of undead. They stick around. There's nothing to be done with them. They get drained of their resources or liquidated because they're totally insensitive to the sort of live world. So again, this is sort of like an experiment. Like, what if you took all these things and cut their heads off? Which things still work? Which things are actually trustless or don't require any interaction? There have been at least a couple of developers, or uh, I don't even know what to call them, financiers or something, that are looking to do development on Pulse. I think either because they have a large stake in the network, no pun intended, they're just committed to the network, and they have a bunch of cash, and they want to see if they can build that out. I think that's totally fair. I mean, you mentioned BSC, which is the final point. If we're going in reverse order, BSC did this too. As you said, it was sort of a low tech or a low innovation fork, changed a few things, and has been quite successful in terms of bringing adoption. A lot of developers deploy dApps on there. A huge amount of economic energy has gone into the dApps on BSC. It makes a lot of the same promises that the Pulse is basically going to fulfill also, which is faster block times and less expensive transactions, making dApps a little bit more usable, a little more friendly. Frankly, Matic does the same thing. I mean, there are a few dApps on there that are just clones of things that are on L1, but they operate faster. They have their own proof of stake mechanism to mine transactions. So I guess this is not so outlandish, which sort of brings me to the final point, is the clone of BSC. Yes, BSC did kind of the minimum required to transition to a proof of stake, that they call it proof of stake authority network, because it's governed by who has the stake on the BNB chain. Um, One of the obvious parallels is that whoever sacrificed those 13 billion in hex is going to have 90% of the stake, or 95% of the stake. And there's also the joke or the meme about click the captcha, where it's like click all the photos of BSC validators, and it's just all different pictures of CZ. So there is sort of a unspoken or tongue-in-cheek centralization in terms of ownership of the token and of the stake and of sort of validation. Simultaneously, as you mentioned, there is a substantial resource burden on running a validator for BSC. I'll just be frank. I mean, we found the same thing with Pulse. In the BSC documentation, they use some really high-end AWS instances. So that is a downside. I get it. In a world where you want validators to be very beefy machines. I mean, EOS had this challenge, and they were just very explicit about it. These are meant to be enterprise-grade operations. To do that, there has to be incentive. EOS had a bunch of rules that I'm not sure worked out exactly as they wanted. BSC has some rules and barely veils the fact that there is a large corporation kind of running the validators, because they can afford to, and they can have the ops budget to run those things. And they did do sort of a minimal set of changes, but the tie-in back to Pulse is that they proved that it worked. That there, at some level, it's not a peer-to-peer cypherpunk game to both participate and run a node. I think the ETH 2.0 folks had a very noble goal of designing an algorithm and testing it very, very rigorously to make sure that you could have essentially micro participation. And I mean, I realize 32 ETH is not micro participation for many people, but if you're, an ETH OG, 32 ETH is not all that much to you. So I also mean micro in terms of it's sort of a cloud of validators of mixed levels of hardware capability. And by that I mean heterogeneous. So it's going to be people's personal laptops. It's going to be a desktop computer they just leave on all the time. It might be a virtual server, things like that. So they are staying somewhat true to the original mission of decentralizing mining and validation. They've always been very good about staying resistant to sort of the encroachment of ASICs and the centralization of mining. And that, to me, is actually revealing itself to be a differentiator. That is the space in which ETH continues to pioneer, frankly. I mean, like the Cardano folks took a very different approach to building from mathematical first principles a game theory perfect proof of stake system. Excuse me. And the ETH folks were sort of a mix of, we have this North Star, or this guiding principle of everybody should be able to participate as a miner or as a validator. And how do we build an algorithm through just raw engineering, testing, and sort of adversarial drills to make that happen? BSC, and I think by extension Pulse, are taking, to my eye, a much more like product management approach. I'm using that like in the from the tech world. Product managers want to get something that works well enough in front of customers and let them use it. And BSC has been successful. Again, I realize that you're coming from a different place than I am. You have a very different set of responsibilities when you're analyzing these things. I'm giving you my perspective, and also I guess, devil's advocate to your position that while it may not be interesting or valuable for your position, your set of interests, your line of work, we do have to acknowledge that at least some parts of these different chains, these different experiments, are worth acknowledging. It's not a fluke that BSC is successful. I don't think it's a fluke that Hex is successful, and I don't think it will be a fluke when Pulse is successful. I think that in spite of the things that people could point out as downsides, I think that there are upsides, some of them intangible, some of them based on track record of things that we know have worked, and some of them based on having a very engaged, very motivated founder. And his tagline is "Have no expectation of profit from the work of others," and I think that that is fair, and also speaks to kind of the awkward regulatory position that we find this kind of infant industry in. Uh, but he's very energizing. He gets people motivated to do things. The fact that there are now well over a dozen people who've broken into the streaming business. Uh, there's a whole YouTube channel that's almost 24 hours a day of content. I think that people would be a little silly not to acknowledge that there's something there. I think you referred to it as building a cult, and I can see the comparison. Um, I feel like I defended that point because that has such a negative connotation. There, it really is a community of shared values, and we haven't run into a case where Richard's behavior deviates from those values. So to me, that's the criterion of falsifiability. That if Richard does something that is clearly against the values that everyone has sort of been drawn to in the Hex community, and in many cases made changes in their own life to conform to. If he goes out of left field, I think I made a joke about Jonestown. If he has a Jonestown moment and you still get all the vitriol and there's no pushback and everything, then to me there's been a failure at some level. It's the comparison to me is the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. Uh, here's a guy who advocates take responsibility and clean your room, and people call it a cult. Uh, Honestly, I actually haven't kept up on that in some time, but the premise is essentially the same. The values being preached are about independence, seeking your fortune, taking charge, taking action, find what works, try and keep what's good, and fix what's wrong. Uh, and I think time will have to tell. So you said 1 year. It would be great to have a conversation in a year and see where we are. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. You did about 30. I'll do about 30. Hopefully this is useful to anybody who's now listened for 3.5 hours. Thanks. And of course, I'm back because the point that I forgot to expand on was trustfulness. So to me, we talked about trustfulness. We talked about decentralization. Um, right there at the end, because I think Eric was pointing out what he saw as some hypocrisy, or maybe not noticing that we were running afoul of these tenets of cryptocurrency. So I want to be very specific about what I mean. So what drew me to blockchains in general was the idea of permissionless databases that were trustless in that the things that were written to them could be verified independently. It's not about trusting a person. It's not about trusting. Um, let's see. So the contrasting point was that you have to trust that Richard is going to do X, Y, or Z. And to me, that is not how I use the term trustfulness or trustlessness. What I mean is cryptographically provable. I mean that if a validator validates a block, that I could be an observer and come to the same conclusion. So I don't need to trust them that they've signed it with their key or something, that the hashes all come out correct. That's trustlessness to me. Decentralization is, I use almost synonymous with permissionless, that anybody could participate. A subset of the validators could decide that even everyone in the current rotation is a bad actor and agree to slash them, to slash their stake so that they would no longer be the set of validators and essentially fork the network. And this is one of the benefits of proof of stake, frankly, that the control that you have is part of the consensus. And if I recall correctly, somebody sent me a blog post by Eric written in 2019 that tried to talk about some of the differences between proof of stake and proof of work. And that was one of the advantages. Actually, I don't know if you characterized it as an advantage. I see it as an advantage of proof of stake, is that if a subset of the network agree that you have been a bad actor, they know the rules. They can apply the slashing and cut you out and say, oh, you're a bad actor. We're going to slash, a third of your stake or two-thirds of your stake, and now you've been overtaken in terms of authority by this other set of validators who act honestly. And because we all agree, you can't show up and sort of regain hegemony. Versus proof of work, where the algorithm and your compute power, your ASIC power, the hash power, can't be taken from you. So this was like a pro-con proof of work versus proof of stake. I think you very cleverly in that blog post, though to my eye it meandered a bit, but right at the end, I think you captured which to me is an interesting difference, is that proof of work ties back to real world resources that are essentially not forgeable, whereas proof of stake is a little softer, it's a little squishier, it's a little bit more flexible and about kind of social consensus, that if some subset of us agree that you have acted in bad faith, then we can slash you and carry on with our lives, and there's really nothing that you, the maybe bad actor, can do about it. So that to me is decentralization, is from a more computer sciencey point of view, that agents in the system can come to independent conclusions or can process information independently of a centralized source of information. So I totally get what you mean by trusting that Richard does the right thing, or centralizing on CZ and Binance as sort of a primary on-ramp. I am just not using the terms in those ways. And to me, those don't pose a problem. Those are hypotheses. Are these good? Like, can you build a successful project with these as not commitments, but features or soft implied features of a system? Much like I was describing the features of Hex, that you say, oh yeah, we've programmed in a very interested economically central party, but otherwise everybody behaves the same. Does that work? Can we invert the Bitcoin formula and you have to stake to maintain your percentage of the network? And what if there's someone who's very, very interested because they have a lot of it? In the BSC case, what if there is this dominant chain that is very clearly centrally managed that can export or project that state onto a sort of online transactional chain? We talked about asynchrony and L2s. And I think what I probably didn't articulate clearly enough was that any mechanism that lets you offload your transactional load to another system behaves similarly to an L2. There are certainly advantages to things like ZK Sync, which we talked about at some length, but even if it's another L1 that is empty but for your transaction load, that's useful. That's fine. That is a, not it's a secondary storage network and compute network that you just have a narrow bridge, and you say, oh yeah, I'm going to put everything over here. I'm going to do all of my sort of transaction load there, and it can sync back, whenever it's convenient, or at the user's convenience. So there was a sort of, I'm trying to squeeze in a bunch of stuff. That was a huge aside uh, that deviated from the other point, which was these are propositions. No, not propositions. It's the word. It's not proposals. It's yeah. Let's go with proposition, but not in the weird way. So if I make a proposition, what if I had a network that had these features? As long as those features still allow independent verification of the validity of any particular transaction, that still is decentralized in the way that I mean it, that every node can independently audit the state. Even if you don't get to author the state, you can still validate it. And it's trustless in the way that not having admin keys or not requiring touch points from the outside world is trustless. I'm going to take one step back. Requiring nudges from the outside world or data feeds from the outside world is, to me, a little bit of a gray area. I wouldn't call that trustful or trustless. But if it requires admin keys, then it starts to break the feature of permissionlessness, and you're starting to get into the um, trustful realm, where an oracle needs to be trusted because it can't be proven that it's providing good data. So this goes to sort of root of trust. Where does that come from? Anything on the blockchain must be trustless because you can verify by starting at the beginning and just replaying all the transactions, and you should get to the same point. That's trustless. And any node can download all those transactions and uh, run the computation, even though it may take them a million years, and they should get to the same state. That's decentralized. They can independently decide. So I'm using trustless and decentralized in sort of technical ways. I understand what you mean, and I don't disagree that those systems have the features that you're talking about, but I think they also mostly have the features that I'm talking about. I haven't gone deep on BNB and BSC, so I don't know if that's 100% true, but it seems to have the features that I'm talking about as well. And just, again, not to put too fine a point on it, but that these are hypotheses or proposals. What if we had a system that worked this way? And to me, that's sort of the crux of it being an experiment. And to my eye, all of these experiments are worthy experiments because we do need to have a balance between purely technical, interesting work that is on the cutting edge of research. Things like ZK rollups sort of qualify for me, kind of in that space. And there are engineering solutions that we need to implement these things in the real world. Frankly, all the work on blockchains falls into this category because they can't replay everything from scratch. There has to be optimizations so that you can look up account balances without having to replay 10 years of history. So these are engineering solutions to have useful applications of some of the cutting edge research, and then their products. If we want blockchain and cryptocurrency to represent a new economy, it has to act like an economy. It has to support businesses. It has to be flexible to business use cases. And sometimes that's going to run afoul of some of our intuitions. But I think these are all good experiments to run. I'm glad we're running a lot of them in parallel because a lot of them are going to fail. And maybe Pulse will be one, but I don't think it will be. And hopefully we can talk in a year and see what happens. Thanks.